Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Weekend Vigilante Show. I'm your host, Sheila Zielinski, joined by my co-host, the one, the only, Dr. Timothy Ball, for January 16th, 2014. The call-in number to our studios is 347-324-3704, and I will try to get to calls towards the end of the program. And I just want to say what an incredible show today, folks. Our show today is entitled Economic Armageddon, and what an exciting dynamic duo we have on today. We have V, the Guerilla Economist. You all know him as the economist who's worked for some of the top commodity trading firms and investment banks. He's contributed to private think tanks, shaping investment policy. Just an incredible track record, and predictions are uncannily accurate and well documented on his appearances with Steve Quayle. And joining him, Ken Schortgen, prominent and well-respected economist with a remarkable thumb in the pulse of the global and U.S. economy. So this melding of the minds, financial minds, if you will, is going to give a hard-hitting analysis on what's really going on and what's coming this year and beyond, and why it's so imperative that people understand this. So without further ado, I would like to first of all welcome Dr. Timothy Ball to the program. Hi, Tim. How you doing?
Fine, Sheila. Thank you.
Excellent. So without further ado, V and Ken, welcome to the program, gentlemen. So glad you could join us.
Great to be on.
Thank you, and good evening.
Nice to have you on. So there's so much to talk about, fellas. I mean, V and Ken, let's just jump right into things here. There is, again, so much to talk about. I mean, 2008 to last year really were years of transition, and 2014 looks to be a pivotal implementation of a watershed moment. And speaking of watershed moments, in December we saw the rules changing once again, because now they're going to taper the QE and run the market up, yet we see the markets can live without it. You've got this nightmare IMF working paper with Carmen Reinhart saying debt sustainability can be achieved through a mix of austerity, forbearance, and growth, and tolerance for higher inflation is needed. What? I mean, the shenanigan and lies just continue to, just absolutely inundate us. And we've got people mindlessly muddling along, and they're not going to see this coming, really. And the big question is, what happens when all this exported inflation comes home to roost and everyone else is trading in currency that's not ours? Weigh in on that, Ken.
Well, the interesting thing about it is if you get once the world starts rejecting the dollar, and all of that, I mean, we're talking probably $12 trillion worth of U.S. currency that's out there outside of the country. Once that starts coming back, we are going to see the U.S. all of a sudden have to stand up to support the dollar, and the last thing that they're going to do, of course, is that we have nothing. We have no manufacturing, we have no industry, and the Fed has been trying to mop up as much liquidity as it could from something I was hearing today, actually. We've got QE, and you mentioned that off the top, the QE. The fact is that everything that we hear in the mainstream, simply window dressing. Okay.
Yes.
$85 trillion or $1 billion per month? No. It's probably been along the lines of $200 billion. And the fact is that what they've been doing is they've been trying to hemorrhage the losses coming from the derivatives.
Weigh in on that, V.
He's right. One of the things I said about almost a year ago when Bernanke boy started doing, well, I like to call him the bearded helicopter, when he started doing his his QE.
The shuck and jive.
Yeah. And he started, doing about $85 billion a month. It really wasn't $85 billion. It is to the tune of $200 billion. I have a source from within the Fed that confirms that. Number one, they are trying to shore up the derivative market, particularly the $440 trillion that's lying out in limbo as interest rate swaps. That's number one. The second thing they're shoring up is the fragile banks within the Eurozone. They've been shoveling trillions of dollars of stimulus into the Eurozone banks behind Congress's back, behind our own backs, so they're not even disclosing what the true amount of what they're spending is. When they tapered $10 billion per month, that's really nothing, folks, in the grand scheme of things, because there's a whole other shadow QE program that's been going on for over 3 years running And that's the thing that they're not talking about.
You know, you kind of step back and look at this. I mean, it absolutely, like, I've been really doing a lot of reading on this Dodd-Frank thing, and I mean, it seems like the priority over human life, over the sovereignty of nations, over everything that's valued in our nation, in our Declaration, in our Constitution, is the functioning of a bankrupt criminal enterprise, globally active, so-called systemically important financial institution to which people are supposed to bow down and sacrifice themselves to. I mean, because this bill is an outright attack on our republic, and it's not simply removal of Glass-Steagall, but it's complete destruction. I mean, this is no jobs, starvation. I mean, 1.3 trillion in derivative obligations. I mean, it's just staggering when you take a macro view and step back and look at this, isn't it?
And the thing, V will agree with me on this. It's time. You know, we did a show recently, and it's called Breaking Paradigms. And I'm going to break a paradigm, and like I said, I think V agrees with me. There is no republic. There is no saving the republic. There is no republic. When you can break through that and understand that the transition has been silent but deadly, then you can realize and you can see the real reasons and the real purposes behind all these things. Okay, a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's just dumb politicians. Wait till the next election," or they'll say, "Oh, you know, the Federal Reserve, that they'll get it right, or they haven't gotten right, or Bernanke's." No. There is a purpose behind all of these things, and it goes way back. I mean, it goes back even beyond Rothschild in the 17th century, wanting to take complete control of the banking system. It goes way back. This has spiritual roots, a culmination as we're heading into the biblical end times. So what you're seeing right now, okay, there's a big difference between 2008 and what is going to be the crash of 2014. In 2008, the unemployment rate was about 5.5%. If you take John Williams Shadow's stats, maybe 10%. But still, it was relatively decent. People had jobs. They were still able to get credit, and then everything crashed, housing bubble, the whole 9 yards. Well, now we have the 5 years, and what they've done is they to fulfill their plan, okay, to print as much money as you could possibly imagine and not have inflation hit Main Street. What they had to do was they had to seal off any loans to businesses, primarily small businesses, but any loans. Everything is kept above board. It's kept at the corporate level. It's kept at the banking level. It's kept at the central banking level. It's kept in the stock market. It's kept on Wall Street. It is not filtering down, very much into Main Street. If you're going to do that, then the expectation, obviously, since small business creates 75% or more of the jobs in this country, if you're going to stop capital and liquidity getting to Main Street, then the expectation is going to be you are going to lose jobs. And the number just came out. Since Obama took office 5 years ago, we have lost 10 million jobs. 10 million.
Incredible.
And nobody questioned, and this is the thing, nobody questioned him in the 2012 elections while he's sitting up there going, I created 5 million jobs. I mean, even Mitt Romney can't be that stupid. He should have responded easily back, well, your 5 million that you created was countered by the 5 million that were lost. But no, he stood there and accepted it and wasn't going to challenge. So that tells you right there that the whole election thing was rigged to begin with. Secondly, the thing about it is what they need to do is if they're going to create this new world order, which is what they intend, they need to make the people as desperate as possible. And what they've done is they've used, if you notice in the new bill, they're cutting unemployment, the 99 weeks. Okay,
yes.
They kept that going for the last 5 years because they were not ready for civil unrest, civil disobedience, whatever. They had to keep trickling just enough to keep people from going over that tipping point. Well, now, like I said, 2014 is going to be the year. They don't have to do that anymore because they're prepared for when that happens. And so right now they have people desperate, and what they're going to do is they're going to be former insider to the Illuminati and the secret societies, Ricky Ray said, jackboot thuggery will only work for short term. And then you've got to offer something that people are willing to say, fine, I'm done, let's move forward. And that's what's going to happen. You're going to have the rebellion of the people because they're tired of it and they got nothing to lose. There's going to be the response by the government agencies, and then eventually somebody or some entity is going to come in and say, hey, wait a second, we have a new order, we've got a new way, we can get you food, jobs, etc. And people are going to be desperate enough to take it. and there won't be any opposition to it.
Congress has had let's face it, V and Ken, Congress has had a chance to deal with some of the worst decisions ever made. I mean, think about the approval of the TARP program at the end of the Bush administration, where they basically handed over to a Treasury first under Hank Paulson to basically put unlimited funds into bailing out virtually any type of financial derivative and asset. I mean, the international banking cartel can essentially shut down economies. I mean, how does Congress willfully go along with the destruction of the country? Because Congress has allowed all this.
Well, Congress is completely bought for and complicit. You know, oftentimes I like to use the analogy of, let's just say you're some honest person who just so happens to run for office at a local town. And imagine, if you will, the local town you're running, every board member, every cop, every fireman, any person holding any sort of civic position is a mafia member, okay? So at some point you can go in with good intentions, but at some level the system will corrupt you, unless, of course, you're like a Ron Paul or you're somebody of very strong morals and characters. That's the reason why Congress goes along with this. Number two, it is human nature that once, one receives a position of power, to crave more of it. And the old axiom is true. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. One of the things I also want to highlight real quick, because, Ken talked about the jobs and the latest job rankings. Now, crunching the real numbers of what's out there, the real macro data, and using my own what I call guerrilla stats. See, we have about 10.6 million people officially unemployed, okay? Yeah. 10.6 million officially unemployed. That means they are the individuals right now that are on the dole that are receiving unemployment checks. You have another 92 million permanently out of the workforce because they just can't find jobs. Now the media is spinning it, saying that, the 92 million that they can't find jobs, it's not that they can't find jobs, it's just they just don't want to work. What they don't tell you is when you take the 92 million, you add it to the 10.6 million, you have about 102 million Americans that are officially, that are in real numbers, that are out of the picture. So you look at the real unemployment rate, it is 30% or more. So that's how bad it is. And these are things that people are not seeing because we have the electronic breadline. And then you have Congress that's bought and paid for, totally sold out, going along with this whole agenda because they think that they got a part. They think they have a seat at the end of this table, and they have another thing coming towards them.
So something else I'd love to add on that. The thing about Congress, if you look at the vast majority of congressmen and women, you can tell that they have IQs well below 100. Yeah. Okay, this is done on purpose because they don't want critical thinkers. They want the rulers per se behind the scenes, whether it's the corporate, the banking, etc. They want individuals in there that will simply do what they tell them to do. They will sign off on legislation that is written by lobbyists, by corporations, the insurance companies, etc. And here's the kicker: the reason that very few at all, minus the Ron Pauls, saw what was coming in 2008 is because since Clinton and then a little bit before, they have manipulated the actual economic data, okay? And the unemployment rate from the BLS is incorrect. The GDP is incorrect. The inflation rate is incorrect. All these things are incorrect. What if you trust in those numbers over time, then you suddenly start believing that those numbers are accurate. And if the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government agency, is telling you, oh, yeah, there's no chance that there's a housing bubble, housing prices are fine, there's no inflation in the stock market, if you hear that enough and believe it, especially if you have the lower IQs that Congress has, then you will be completely shocked when the bottom falls out because you're not prepared for it. And this is how Hank Paulson could walk into the meeting room on that day, on that weekend when Bear Stearns and Lehman were sliced and diced, and say, you know what, if you guys don't sign this TARP thing, there is the potential for martial law because people will be out in the streets. And, of course, since they were not prepared for the real numbers, they thought this was an end-of-the-world type crisis, and they were willing to sign off on it.
So the talking heads are essentially saying everything's fine, nothing to see here, folks. You've got fabricated reports, fictitious business, unemployment's a sham, the GDP is a joke, all this fabricated retail sales. You don't even have any growth. I mean, so you're saying really, Ken, this is completely manipulated statistics then, nothing to see here.
Oh, yeah, we have had negative 4% growth since 2008. We have not left the recession. We are, in fact, probably in a Great Depression, but when you can print enough money and dole that out through channels such as welfare, okay, because the reason that they're printing money to oblivion is because they know that the dollar system is soon to be gone. So if you know that the whole system is going to be gone and reset, which Jim Willie has come out and said that this is the year of the currency reset. When you know it's going to be reset, you can print to oblivion because it's going to get erased at the top, and they don't really care about the people, the fact that all of a sudden they're going to see a devalued new currency or replaced currency. So they can print that to the top, and they can keep doling it down as long, and the U.S. can get away with it because it's the reserve currency. Once that reserve currency is no longer accepted, which we're on the verge, we are on the verge of that happening, then the game is up, and that's when you're going to start seeing the trigger effects.
You mentioned about that they are now ready. I assume with that you're referring to the establishment of police forces in the bureaucracies and the purchase of 1.5 billion rounds of ammunition by the Homeland Security of not just ammunition, PowerPoint bullets and so on. Well, and then the EPA having its own police force and going onto property with police that are EPA police, but police on the back of their shirts. I assume that's what you're talking about by them being ready. And the other side of it is, and Sheila and I have talked about this before, the elimination of so many senior officers in the military and the weakening and undermining of the military, because presumably, while the military, of course, are beholden to the president as the commander-in-chief, but who would they side with in the event of this essentially SS taking over? Is that what I'm hearing when you say they're ready?
Yes and no, and I'll say this from the point. When I'm saying they're ready, I'm talking about the international community who is forced to use the dollar at this current time. Okay. What China has already been preparing well in advance since September of 2012 and before that, but they primarily started the ball rolling in 2012 when they created an oil wholesaling, and then they created a new trade partnership. They've been accumulating gold and other resources. As a matter of fact, there's a great thing we can talk about here. You want to know a statistic that'll blow your mind? The Chinese now own the commercial property, 60% of all the commercial property in South Manhattan, i.e. Wall Street.
China's become the largest trading nation. They're bypassing international trade currency. They're already buying oil with their own currency. I mean, if China takes dominion with a gold-backed trade note, the U.S. would then desperately need gold. The U.S. has no gold. I mean, there's a lot of things with implications from that, Ken.
Now you hit it. And here's the thing. When you look at it honestly, you talked about the 1.5 billion rounds. Honestly, I don't think that 1.5 billion rounds was used necessarily because it's going to be to fund this huge army that out of DHS. Yeah, they're going to do that, but what they were doing was they were buying the entire supply so that the citizens couldn't get it. That's why we've had the shortages over the past year. Now here's the interesting thing about it is what that is being done for is to protect the elite class. Civil unrest that's going to come when, I believe, this is just an opinion, but I'm basing it on a number of indicators that are coming out. Because if you look at it really honestly, if the Japanese in World War II were afraid when they had this huge military machine to take on the people of the United States because there was a gun behind every blade of grass, there were 22 million new FBI background checks in last year alone. 22 million. Okay, there's not enough DHS and local police and that They can't even handle the fact that in Detroit right now they are doing heroin drug deals in front of schools, and the police aren't even bothering to go out there.
Yeah.
Okay, they just don't have enough people. But what they're going to do is they're going to protect certain sections and regions of the country, because when this currency reset happens, when the dollar goes by the wayside, you're going to have massive unrest. One of the important things to look at is when the dollar no longer is the reserve currency, because it's the international trade settlement currency. Okay? Japan is not, China, Japan, everyone, they're not going to ship any goods here. What are we going to do for the shelves for food? What are we going to do since we have no manufacturing? Even our farming has a tendency to go offshore and then come back to us. So you're not going to have anything on the store shelves, and people are going to be dealing so much with inner city unrest. They're not going to have time to go after, the individuals on Wall Street and that who did this. So that's what it's going to, primarily a protection for. There may be some where they try to hinder movement on the freeways and that, but the point is they're going to be dealing with enough time dealing with the factor that the U.S. is no longer in control of the global economy. So they can bluster all they want, but if they don't have control of the currency, they don't have the gold to enter into this new international trade settlement, they're going to, how are they going to even get material, food, etc., to deal with themselves, much less try to take complete control over the country?
China and Russia are really playing chess for supremacy, and they're cutting deals to sidestep the dollar. You just touched on China's been stockpiling for years. And so, what's interesting is that China's melting down their exchange-approved bars and making coins. So, obviously a gold-backed currency. They want the next standard. If China takes dominion with a gold-backed trade note, the U.S. would, what happens here when the Chinese say, we want our money back, America? That's what I'm wondering.
Well,
hey, V, you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of moves by China, and a lot of people, especially in the finance world, they don't quite understand the dragon. I've had a lot of battlings this year between a lot of these pundits who are saying that China's their bubble's worse than ours, this, that, and the other, and they really don't understand the banking aspect of China, nor the shadow banking aspect of China. They are the most liquid market in the world. So whatever bubble they have the liquidity to absorb any shock to the system, number one. Number two, to beat the U.S. in their own game, they understood that you have to create a few bubbles in order to beat the United States. Now, in order to inoculate themselves against any of the damage that some of these blown bubbles and this blown real estate would cause them, what do? They bought massive, tremendous amounts of hard assets, okay? And they've encouraged their citizenry to buy gold and precious metals at a ravenous rate. All right, so we've all seen the pictures of 10,000 Chinese hanging around in the street corners buying gold, waiting online. Okay. Now, one of the things that Ken mentioned is the fact that China owns about 60% of the financial district down in South Manhattan. He's absolutely right. The number's actually a little bit more than that. One of the biggest acquisitions that China did was buy J.P. Morgan's headquarters right here in Chase One Plaza, right down here in New York, and that building sold for around $750 million. That building is worth $1.5 billion. So my question is, why did J.P. Morgan let their headquarters go to the Chinese for 50% off market value?
It's interesting because I heard an interesting piece of tale of news regarding that. Someone thinks that J.P. Morgan in a transaction with China had a default.
Yes,
there was a default somewhere. Nobody's heard what the default is, but China then called in that note, that lien, that mortgage, whatever, and that's the reason why J.P. Morgan decided, boom, plus the fact that they are completely out of gold, so there's no purpose for a vault anyway. They're pulling completely out of the CFTC, the futures market. They're pulling out of the EBT card market. They're pulling completely out. J.P. Morgan Chase is another bank that is on the threshold of just collapse.
Right. Well, they're getting out of commodities. You see Goldman Sachs and Deutsche dumping commodities. That's interesting, isn't it?
They can't. They're trying to get rid of as much liability as possible, because as V was the one who broke the news a number of months ago, Deutsche Bank every single day stands on the threshold of insolvency. Any real crisis event will knock it over.
Exactly. And also another thing, J.P. Morgan sold that building for default. That building underground has the largest private vault in the United States. The vault happens to be running right around, right underground, 5 stories below Liberty Street, and it connects directly to the New York Fed. Okay, the New York Fed, my source at the Fed said that J.P. Morgan did in fact sell that because they could not cover a short. They were default, and that building was sold as collateral. You do not sell real estate in Manhattan 50% below market value. You just don't do that, okay? And that's pretty interesting. Before that sell-off to the Chinese, what happened a month before that? You all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you saw a tremendous, I don't remember the exact ounces, but a tremendous amount of silver was stored in their vault, and then it was rapidly sold off. So we knew that there were some massive transactions that were going around at the morgue, as we like to call it. And that building was definitely sold because of that. The Chinese got it. The Chinese also, like no one mentioned the fact that the Chinese have taken over also, I believe it was Morgan Stanley's energy sector, their energy desk.
Yep,
they've taken that over. They've taken over Goldman Sachs' commodity business. They've taken over so many aspects of our financial industry as well as our commodity industry. Folks, this is what I said. I said this months ago. China's biggest sector in its economy, it's not its manufacturing, okay, of cheap goods. Their biggest sector right now is banking, and they've been beating us to a bloody pulp. Now, recently we just heard that, China just bought about $1.3 trillion in U.S. debt. Now, people say to me, well, V, why the hell did they just buy $1.3 trillion of debt? Well, the answer is quite simple. Number one, they're going to use it as leverage when the time comes to dump, okay? And what I mean by that is this. There is more damage done to an economy when the money of that economy is held abroad, and all of a sudden that money comes flooding back in. The other thing that they're doing, and they've been doing this for the last 10 years, is using U.S. debt, the dollar, to go out and buy hard assets. They've been using U.S. dollars to fund their projects in Africa. Okay, now I want you to think about this. We've been, playing a game of checkers with the Chinese while they're playing chess, and we've been playing this back and forth game with them in Africa. The Japanese are involved and the Indians are involved as well, but China is competing heavily against the U.S., and they're making deals in Africa, and they're cutting deals in Africa and buying hard assets using our own currency. And that's the irony of it, folks. They're using our own money against us. You cannot just, it's incredibly brilliant.
Hey, V, let me expand on that a little bit, too. Not only is China using our own money against us, i.e. to buy commercial property, just recently, China brought in, I think it was $1 billion of treasuries, which are considered pristine collateral. I mean, the best collateral you can get if you're going to deal with a bank. And they went to Wells Fargo, deposited in Wells Fargo, the most solvent of the big banks left around there. Because they have this pristine collateral, what do banks usually do? Not only will they lend you money, they will lend you with leverage. So China is taking that $1 billion, and they're getting to leverage loans out 5 times that. So they're getting $5 billion to go buy commercial property. They're buying property in Detroit. You know what? If you've seen the numbers, why all of a sudden is Detroit property going up 17% in a month? It's because China's buying it all. Lansing, they're buying industrial parks. A few years ago, there was this huge story that came out in Idaho where the state of Idaho was talking about, hey, we've got this 50-square-mile area, and we want to create an economic zone, and China is going to build a city there of manufacturing and industry. Now, that sort of fell under the radar, but in the meantime, they're purchasing industrial parks, manufacturing parks. When the whole switchover comes, made in America will be the paradigm, but it's going to be owned by China and Chinese corporations.
Absolutely. Even in my own backyard over here in New York, the Chinese are went ahead. They're actually starting projects to develop a huge China industrial city right in upstate New York. So They are doing this all over the country, and a lot of the politicians, the state senators, the congressmen are putting pressure on the local legislatures and the local government to basically sign over all licenses, make the whole licensing and certification process, the zoning, as easy as possible. It's bending over backwards for them. So because they know this is the collateral. This is what happens. You know, the borrower is a slave to the lender, or is a servant to the lender, and that's what you see playing out. Absolutely.
By the way, just one little small example I have of what the Chinese have been doing. I know a guy that had a small operation in the Athabasca tar sands, which, of course, as you know, is a huge issue in global energy. And a lot of people don't know that there's as much tar sands, or whatever you want to call it, under Saskatchewan. In fact, there's more under Saskatchewan than there is in Alberta. But anyway, he owned this small operation. He said 4 Chinese guys showed up in suits one day at his business and said, "We want to buy your business." And he said, "It's not for sale." And they just said, "Well, we'd like to buy it." Figured, well, I'll just ask for a ridiculous price just to get rid of them. He named a number. They pulled out the checkbook. It was absolutely incredible. And they found out that they were going around Canada, with this checkbook, buying up portions of businesses as getting a foothold in. So if it's going on in Canada, it's going on throughout the world.
Right, and
Absolutely.
this is what China is doing. Okay, they understand at this point in time they're not fully prepared to dump all the treasuries back in the dollar. If you for an example, if you take a look at what happened last summer, China and Japan sold one day $42 billion in treasuries. That was the largest block they'd ever sold in a month. That was enough to cause the Fed to stop to pull back the taper in September. Just that was enough that was China shooting a shot over the bow, saying, "No, you're not going to do this." And the Fed waited until December and then started in January. But that's primarily what pulled back the taper, was the fact that you saw interest rates start to really skyrocket, with China and Japan just doing a block of $42 billion worth of treasuries when they hold combined something like 3 or 4 trillion. Okay, 42 billion compared to 3. So you can imagine what would happen if they start doing it in greater numbers. Well, China, in the meantime, doesn't want to hold this debt, these reserves, or these treasuries. They know it's eventually going to be worthless. So what they're doing is, like I said, they're going to Wells Fargo and they're leveraging it to use as collateral for loans. That way, if the treasuries go by, you know what, they don't care. And what they're doing also is they're going to other countries and they can spend exorbitant amounts, well above the cost of the business or the asset, because they have $1.3 trillion of these U.S. dollars of these treasuries that they want to get rid of, and they're willing to get rid of them at any price. So that's why they're overpaying for stuff, because at this point in time, assets are much, much better at any price than holding paper.
There seems to be, and I'm sort of floating all this around in my mind, because I've gone through Bretton Woods and the gold standard and de Gaulle demanding his money and all these other things and the reactions to that. But it seems to be right now that there are things occurring on 2 distinctly different levels, but are in fact interconnected. And what I mean by that is what you've been talking about is monetary issues on a global scale and the influence and control of China and so on. And of course, we see all the people, or some of these left-wing people around the world, saying China is the perfect place and it's the way to go, and you really call it state capitalism. I mean, the head of the EU climate thing the other day said, that the problem with America is democracy. China's the best way to run a government. But anyway, so there's that level, there's that international, which of course is what the Chinese are really focused on. But the biggest nation that's a threat to that international goal are the citizens of the United States. Now, you talked about the guns and the control of the guns and so on, but it seems to me that Obama's policies are in concert with those larger international policies, because he is undermining both the U.S. economy and identifying a culprit. So what he's doing is making the economy collapse and then having somebody to blame, and of course he'll blame the wealthy. It seems to me that his current campaign of inequality of income, where because of his policies the poor become poorer, and with Bernanke printing the money and all of that going to the wealthy and through the stock market, which is going through the roof, which is in complete contradiction to what the market is doing, he's creating and exacerbating that inequality. Of course, it will undermine the strength of the American people to resist what's actually going on an international basis. Is there any logic to any of that?
There's a lot of logic to all of that. This is when you have a couple of events that happen randomly, you can say it's coincidence. But when you have many, many events that happen successively over and over again, that you begin to see that there's a march and a pattern towards incrementalism, it's no longer a coincidence. It's an orchestrated agenda. It is definitely a global plan. Now, there are various pockets of resistance. There are certain disjointed aspects of this whole entire plan, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and I think Ken will agree with me that this is part of a larger agenda that, you know, it goes back, and like what Ken said earlier, and I agree with him, this whole banking system goes back thousands of years, and you know, we are, you know, now they're going for broke. And, you know, to elaborate a little bit what's happening between the East and the West, the East is doing a smash and grab, trying to get as much hard assets as possible. He who has the hard assets wins. It's as simple as that. And the only thing that the Western banksters have is paper and understanding the manipulation and the perception of paper. That's it. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this whole thing boils over. And oftentimes when you have two complete dichotomies clashing like the way they are today, oftentimes it ends in a war, and a massive war. And perhaps that's exactly what they probably want.
Yeah, two things to tie into this. We talked about paradigms. Okay. The paradigm that we're looking at here is that the United States controls and runs all of the events and all of the monetary policy that happens. You know, behind the scenes, you've got the powers that be, the Western banking system, the Rothschild banking system, the J.P. Morgan, et cetera, going back. But you also have the East. You have two forces that are seeking to have dominion in this quote-unquote New World Order. Before 1972, nobody would have thought that Mao's agrarian country of China would be anything.
Right. Yeah.
But why all of a sudden did in 72 we have this opportunity to open them up, and then of course we had NAFTA, and then we had, you know, and China took that opportunity just like Russia it learned from the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, the U.S. used economics to bring down the fall of the Soviet Union, and Putin is now doing the same to us.
It sounds like the Roman payback playbook.
It is, but I'm gonna throw a bombshell at you. Did you know we're already at war with China?
Yeah, we've been at war at least the last.
We are at war right now in China, in Africa, South Africa. Okay, U.S. troops are coming back either dead or injured from Djibouti, all over control of the resources, the oil, and the territories and the economic blocks coming from that. China pretty much has solidified South Africa. Russia has solidified South Africa, but the U.S. can't give it up because the more pieces that China and Russia take off the playing field, okay, the less support the world has for the petrodollar. And this is, Syria was about the petrodollar. Everything's about the petrodollar. But Russia and China were smart. This is why, you know, there's a lot of prophecies, et cetera, that the Russians and the Chinese are going to come in and take over. They're not going to take over America. You know what? Trying to hold and control a foreign country is a lose-lose scenario. The Roman Empire knew it. The British Empire eventually knew it. Everybody knows it. Look at what the U.S. We're so spread out with bases everywhere, trying to every conflict. They're not stupid. They're not going to repeat the same things over and over. We didn't learn from watching the Russians in Afghanistan, so we did the exact same thing. We're stupid. So anyway, what they're going to do is, if you can go into a place and create the infrastructure and make life better for the people there, the people will be willing to work for you and understand your subtle economic dominion because, it's better than what they had. They don't have to rule from a government entity. Who really rules? The one who sits in the White House or the one who pays you your paycheck? That's what it's all about. And this is why China is consolidating. Going back to 2012, we had the agreement between China and Russia to then sell oil in currencies other than than the dollar. Boom, that was the first hit in the petrodollar. And Russia, in the agreement, said that they'll supply China as much oil as they want. This is how Iran has gotten away from the sanctions. And this is why the U.S. eventually had to come begging to Iran's door. Okay.
Well, these Saudi-U.S. oil deals, OPEC only selling U.S. dollars in these foreign oil deals, that made every nation require Federal Reserve notes, and hence, of course, as you talked about the petrodollar scheme. But when you have an oil-backed currency outspending all nations in the world and you create this juggernaut military and you're sort of the undisputed world heavyweight superpower, because essentially 70% of the Saudi Arabians' wealth landed in one account, the New York Federal Reserve. America, for a long time, let's face it, essentially had an unlimited credit card, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, but eventually even, the life cycle of a purely fiat currency is on average 29 years and a max life of 42. Yeah. We are entering into the 43rd year.
But I think the rest of the world recognizes there's nothing currently holding up the value of the dollar. The rest of the world recognizes there's nothing holding it up, and it's almost like they're waiting for us just to collapse. And Putin saying, "Hey, we don't need you, America."
Yeah, but right. Sheila, they've got the benefit of the person in the White House currently doing the collapse for them because the word international and the song of the communists is international. But I want to string a couple of other things together. One of the things, of course, that gave America so much power was its ability to produce food. And people forget that before the Industrial Revolution, there was an agricultural revolution that gave Britain its power. And the U.S., I believe it was, at the end of the war, was producing some 54% of all the foodstuffs produced in the world. And you were talking earlier about that being undermined. Certainly with the Bush policy on land and agriculture policy, where people in New York were buying farms simply to get the government handouts, not to grow crops. It became a very, very profitable investment. But, and I've got to make a little bit of a confession here, maybe this is egotistical, but I did some work with the Chinese about 20 years ago. They came to Canada and through the Canadian government were looking for help in increasing their food productivity capability in the northern part of China. Now, in the southern part of China, they're one of the most productive regions of the world, where they're triple cropping in most regions. But the north had great potential. China was, of course, what they were doing, and I knew this by working with the Canadian Wheat Board. We knew when they were going to buy Canadian grain because they were using the Hong Kong, and that's why they never took over Hong Kong, because it was a conduit for their financial dealings. We knew they were going to buy Canadian grain when suddenly Chinese like jade and treasures started showing up, because they only paid cash for the grain. And they were because they were paying cash and getting some subsidy, they were buying Canadian grain wheat at $3 a bushel. But what I found out later was they were then taking the rice from their own people and selling it on the world market for $4 a bushel. So they were effectively, making profit on turning over the food. But what they saw was this opportunity to increase food production in northern China. And by the way, the University of North Dakota was partly involved with this. A guy by the name of Bill Dando, who was an expert on northern U.S. wheat production, was partly involved. What they did under the latter stages of Mao was increase their food production, so they no longer had to import food. That then freed up their economy, and now, of course, as you know, they're exporting food to Japan. And the other day I was looking at jars of mandarin oranges, not refrigerated, but all products of China. The food products we're seeing in our supermarkets increasing all the time. And now I know the Japanese are very upset about this, but I've thrown a whole bunch of ideas out there, but it all seems to fit with what's going on.
Well, I want to say something about food production in the U.S.
Yep.
When you look at every aspect of the American economy, we've had sectors either, they let it completely get shuttered where it just completely crashes in and of itself, or they outsource it, or in the case of American food production, because our agrarian industry was, like what Dr. Tim said, 54% of world production. That's going to be destroyed now, because what you are seeing currently right now is more and more countries saying no to U.S. grains and U.S. soy, U.S. corn, and the primary reason for that is Monsanto and GMOs. Even if you are a farmer who has a farm miles and miles, tens of miles away from a GMO corn, soy, or wheat field, if just one grain of this genetically modified organism gets into your plant, and somehow there's some sort of cross-germination, and that plant germinates and you have a new yield, they can go ahead and find that gene within the whole entire makeup of that plant. Because as you know, Dr. Tim, and if the listeners don't know this, a plant doesn't have one mom or dad. It has many.
Yeah.
Okay. And if they find just one speck of tainted genetics, it's GMO now. And then Monsanto goes ahead and sues the farmer, this, that, and the other. That's a whole other thing that people are aware of. But what happens is the Europeans have said no to GMOs. The Russians have said no to GMOs. The Chinese have said no to GMOs. So where is the American farmer who has worked and broken his back trying to ensure that he has a good quality product that he can sell, but now he can't because some industrial farm 20 miles up the road happened to germinate a few, happened to have a few tainted seeds go his way, and now his plants are germinating this cross DNA strain. What's he to do? So what's happening is that our food industry is being shut down. More and more farms are going out of business. More and more farmers are saying enough's enough. They just can't take it. So in every aspect you look at it industrially, we're losing. And unless we stand up and put an end to this nonsense, this is going to be a death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, can I add to that, by the way, it isn't just the grain, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, but of course John Kennedy said farming is the only business in the world where you buy it retail and sell it wholesale. So,
yes.
It's a very astute observation. But I heard, I know about, I've talked to people that are in the industry because I worked with the farm industry and agribusiness across Canada because of the weather work that I was doing. But Canada is a huge exporter of hogs. For example, the province of Manitoba is 19 million hogs a year going to China. But what they started doing was they would say, we can't take that load of hogs because you've used a particular hormone or a particular chemical. So it's much the same as the GMO, using some either legitimate or even arbitrary claim of tainted product and therefore rejecting it. You see this across the board of controlling the export by giving it a bad name, just saying, it's tainted, we won't take it, and therefore the industry collapses in the home base. So as I said, it's not just the GMO thing, it's being done with so many products.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing to realize too, at least in the U.S., only 3% of the farms in America are owned by family farms. 97% are owned by corporate. So the Chinese don't have to buy land. All they have to do is invest and own the corporations, and they have absolute control over the farming in America. Okay, that's been the worst part about the farming thing is that as individual, it goes back to the 1800s. You remember the old populist movement where the farmers wanted silver to be used as currency, not just gold? William Jennings Bryan being the man of the people. We had back then where the farmers, unfortunately, they were like the scarecrow in Wizard of Oz. They didn't have a brain. They didn't realize that you could not go individually against the retailer and the grocer and the middleman. You had to get together and create a co-op. And unfortunately for most of them, it came maybe a few decades too late. If most of the family farms had individually incorporated themselves to a certain point, during the Great Depression, they wouldn't have lost all their land. A lot of times they could have hedged their possibility of losses and gains in that, and we wouldn't have had this great consuming of farmland by the Archer Daniel Midlands, by the Monsantos, et cetera, et cetera. And if you take a look at an interesting point, George Soros isn't buying farmland per se. He's buying the refiners. He's buying the ports or the port access. What he's doing is he's becoming the middleman, and he's controlling where the food is. So if the middleman buys from the farmers, okay, there is no law that says they have to provide or sell that food here in America. So they're shipping that stuff all internationally and out of the country.
You mentioned George Soros, and I happen to think he's evil personified, as I do of Maurice Strong. But Soros made his money in trading currencies, right? And it seemed to me that there was a point at which I think, but it was 17 very small nations all said, you're effectively destroying our economies. One person, one private owner. Is Soros a rogue, or is he part of the larger? Because he certainly appears to be a one world government person, and certainly is working with Maurice Strong and so on. So where does Soros fit in all of this?
Georgie Boy is part of the echelon of individuals that are part of Globalization Incorporated. Yeah, he's definitely part of the cadre. Jim
Rogers used to work with George Soros during that time. Jim Rogers eventually broke off. So you've got an investor who's actually trying to come out and tell people what's going on, but. Yeah. During the great time of the Soros's rise and control over the British currency, Rogers was right there with him.
Maurice Strong, he made a boatload off the petrodollar along with the head of the UN. Interesting.
Strong is now living in China. In fact, he wanted to come back. He had his 85th birthday. He wanted to come back, but of course, if he goes to the U.S., they want to put him in jail, or they certainly want to arrest him because of the millions he made off the oil for food in Iraq. And he did it with Kofi Annan and both of them with their sons involved. That was divulged, by the way, by a South Korean businessman who was handling the transfer of the money for them. And he actually showed on television a $1 million check that he had that was proof of it. So, yeah, all these people are making millions off of it for themselves. Strong hypocrisy. He by the way, is the guy that set up the Agenda 21, the idea that you have one world government because the problems require a single global government to control pollution and climate change and so on. So those became the vehicles for this one world agenda, and Strong was certainly very much at the heart of it. And, of course, also carrying over the ideas of the Club of Rome to Agenda 21. The Agenda 21, when you read the principles involved in it, is the Club of Rome manifesto almost completely.
And I look at it from a much, much, much different perspective. Obviously, we're talking about micro details. We're talking about things that are being planned and in the works, and some of it's being implemented. The EPA's takeover and the tax on raw milk, and et cetera, et cetera. Yep. These are the small things that are trying to be done as I would like to say, the cadre of idiots think that's the way control is imposed. But in the long run, most people, unless you are sitting on the outside as a Christian, looking at the fact that this is base level, at the root level, is a spiritual war and a spiritual battle, and what happens on the earth is simply consequences coming from that. So rather, more than dealing in the long run with the individual plays, chess moves, as L.A. Marzulli likes to say, the cosmic chess match is, even though the West is trying to impose its form of global dominion and government, and the East is trying to do its form more using economics, the carrot versus the stick, in the end, what is prophetically to come true, then both sides are going to be cast away and thrown aside when the Antichrist comes onto the scene and creates his own form of global dominion.
Well, I think that's a very good point, because everything we've talked about up to now is of the earth, isn't it? It's material and it's wealth. and it's not spiritual at all. But what you're telling me, and I agree with you, is that behind all of this is really the spiritual destruction.
Yeah, because in the end, you know what? Individuals, and this is why we always ask the question, why can't people see? It's as V has said many times, cognitive dissonance. The problems and the issues are so vast and so big that people just don't feel that they can do anything anymore. The voting doesn't matter. The politicians don't matter. The monetary system is already on the wayside. Your job, you no longer have control over your job, so you feel small, and you're like, what is there to do? What individually? You could have civil unrest, and you could try a rebellion, revolution, but this is not 1776. Okay, this is not fighting an enemy that is across the ocean that you can have time to work without having. No, this is a smaller world. This is a technology world. This is where things happen in a minute, in a second, not in months crossing the ocean, etc. A lot of situations are different. So those who talk about the Patriot movement and this and that, they fail to consider that the spirit may be there, but the circumstances are changed. We don't have the single-shot rifles. You're going to be dealing with something that's even greater, and the fact that Americans do not have the will and fortitude and the stock that we did 250 years ago. Okay, we have a wussified society. We have a controlled, programmed society where if things get too difficult, it's very easy to quit because there's always a safety net. And this is why it's so much harder. Somebody on Coast to Coast was saying an interesting thing. When they were talking about, if you remember when Lindsey Graham was going nuts, making this statement, you know what, the potential that there's a nuclear bomb going to hit Charleston Harbor, that can't happen. Something was behind that. And what we find out in the meantime is that 3 head nuclear officers were removed by President Obama.
Talking about Dr. Jim Garrow.
Yeah, Jim Garrow.
Right.
Whether that the president was actually trying to snag a few nukes and set them off over cities, well, you know what? I'll leave that for greater minds because that's not my area of expertise. But the important part about that is that things in this world are well out of control of the people. We don't have a frontier anymore. Okay, you can't go hide on across the Mississippi in the wilderness or whatever. Everything is seen, recognized, viewed, and in a moment's notice, and as the NSA has shown, everywhere.
And data mined, yes.
And data mined. Okay, this is the time more than anything. These are the times that people have to ask themselves, okay, if the physical world and the systems and the society and the cultures that I once knew 50 years ago, or even 30 or 40 years ago, just aren't there anymore, what is the one answer? We can lay out all these things and show all these indicators. Half the people may believe it and see it. Half the people, for 5 years now, from all the analysts out there who've been trying to say it, they're never going to believe it. They're never going to see it. So be it. You know what? That's a choice they made. It's like salvation. It's a choice. If you don't, no skin off my neck. But on the other side of the coin is these are the times, because if what is to come is going to be a spiritual dominion by the enemy, by the adversary, most of our cultivation should not be on trying to see what we can do in the physical world, but more what we can do spiritually within ourselves, recognizing that, I have within me the power that created all things. What can God not do for me for those who trust?
Good point. And have we learned nothing? We won't stand for anything, but we'll fall for everything. And it seems like we have financial, economic, Alzheimer's or ADD because, you look at the history and I don't get, I think there's some people that even with the most virulent case of economic normalcy bias are looking around, whether it's cognitive dissonance or not, saying something stinks in Denmark here. It seems like it is a very spiritual overtone. It's like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. Every day you see all this unfolding. It's quite interesting.
Sheila, maybe the answer to that is in the school system, because I'm sitting here thinking about all we're talking about and the parallels. With Santa Ana, who said that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I'm thinking about the parallels with the collapse of the Weimar Republic following the Treaty of Versailles, where the French wanted reparations from Germany for the damage they did, and then wouldn't let Germany develop its industry to develop the money to pay off those reparations. And the Americans were lending the Germans money to pay the French, which of course led to the collapse of the Weimar Republic and hyperinflation and stories of wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread and so on. But of course, then what's interesting, and the parallel with what we're talking about here, is that into those vacuums step the demagogues, step the Hitlers, that they see the opportunities here to say, look what those people have done to you. Let me run the show, and then of course you've got your SS. That if anybody steps out of line, they're silent. And one of the things I look at, and Sheila, you and I have talked about this before, with interest of mine. Hundreds of Allied prisoners of war escaped from Germany. Not one German prisoner of war escaped from the Allied nations. Oh, I should say one did. And, in fact, they made a movie about it because it was such a unique thing. He escaped from a logging camp in northern Ontario and got down to Mexico. But the reason was, of course, because the support for the public for the war in the Allies was 100%, whereas in Germany, an awful lot of Germans didn't like what Hitler was doing, but there was nothing they could do about it. And I'm wondering if the public could be appraised and all of that explained to them and say, look, here's the same path that we're on, except now it's on a global scale. Would that help? What comments about those observations?
Hey, V, isn't it interesting, the article I wrote for Rogue Money this week?
Absolutely.
The underlying social currents beginning to feel like 1930.
Yep.
I mean, the number four book on iTunes that's right now is Mein Kampf.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of the heads of the Occupy movement going on Rolling Stone magazine, I believe, saying that we need a hybridized form of communism, Nazism, fascism, etc.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
What a genius.
But these are the undercurrents. This is why Bitcoin is all of a sudden manifesting, because people know there's a problem, and they know that their current systems and cultures and societies, there's nothing they can do about it, so they're reaching out to anything.
But, I mean, when you've got Wall Street creating different kinds of absurd bond funds, look at Merrill Lynch and Fortress. I mean, that's just absolutely absurd, is it not?
Well, you're talking about their convict bond funds, right?
Yeah.
You pick a convict. It's like a video game. I love it.
Yeah. Sheila, I'm going to jump in here for a minute because this is time for my favorite story that I learned as a teenager, but I didn't realize till I'm old what it meant. The joke in England was that Hyde Park Corner was the only place where anybody could say anything they wanted, where free speech was truly allowed. So people took their soapbox and stood up and just harangued the crowd. This guy's up there shouting, "Come the revolution, we'll all wear shirts and ties." And a guy at the back says, "I don't want to wear a shirt and tie." And the speaker says, "Come the revolution, you'll do what you're bloody well told." And that is, to me, typifies that Rolling Stones guy. That I want this, but don't ask for it because you might get it. Then you'll be sorry. But anyway, sorry, I meant to interrupt your line of thought there.
But I mean, when you have the products on the shelves, but people can't afford them. I mean, when hyperinflation kicks in and you get price inflation, I mean, let's say essentially you go to sleep on one night and you wake up and your gas is $15 a gallon. I mean, I think people quite understand the gravity of what's going on here.
No, the vast majority never understands the gravity of anything. The vast majority understands the gravity that if they don't get home in time and if their TiVo is not working right, they're going to miss the reality show. That is as far as the extent of the masses. And when I get on the radio, and guys like Ken get on the radio, and I'm up there hammering and thundering, is not for the masses. It's for that 2 to 3% that are awake. It's and the nuances within that 2 to 3%. If the 2 to 3% could awaken and understand the magnitude of what's happening, and then, you know what, then they stand the chance of making some sort of a difference. And it might not be a complete social change we're talking about, but being able to bring more people into the fold, getting them prepared for the most massive transition in global economic history. And that's what this whole thing is about. And most importantly, like with Ken Highland, it's a spiritual thing. I think Steve Quayle said it best. There are no political solutions for spiritual problems. And that's the first thing we need to understand. That, there is an enemy arrayed against us, but that our enemy, though he might have, certain things up his sleeve and, certain weapons and accoutrements that he has, is not invincible. And if we are able to understand who we are in Christ, then there could be a great change that could occur. But apart from that, I mean, what do you do? People ask me every day, well, V, what kind of foreign stock could I get involved in? Well, fat chance with that. Thanks to TPP and thanks to FATCA, most importantly, you can't go anywhere as an American and open up a stock. And you can't, let's just say this. I mean, FATCA is so notorious. When I was talking to one of my clients from Canada, the woman's telling me in tears that here's a woman who comes from a missionary background, moves to Canada 40 years ago with her family. Eventually, she marries a Canadian, has Canadian children. The husband that she's married to, the man died in September. They've worked hard, they saved, they've invested. He has a sizable inheritance, but she has to sign. And she's a Canadian citizen. She's got to sign an American W-8 IRS form in order to get those Canadian funds out. How insane is that? Right. How insane is it? Because because of FATCA, they changed the terminology. It's no longer U.S. citizens. So all those U.S. citizens who went abroad and expatriated themselves, okay, they can still come after you because the terminology is not U.S. citizen, it's U.S. person. So what that means is, let's say Ken decides to get the heck out of here, and Ken goes over to Singapore, and he's living a life, and all of a sudden Ken makes more than $90,000 that 1 year. Now he's got to report it. But Ken's like, wait a minute, why is the IRS harassing me? Well, I'm not a U.S. citizen. I'm a Singaporean now. Well, too bad, Ken. You happen to be related to V back in the United States, and because you guys are related, you're going to have to pay because you're now a U.S. person. This is how nefarious things have gotten. So you see, folks, the loopholes are closing all over. The escape hatches are starting to close everywhere. So the only thing you have to do is hunker down. And when you hunker down, you have to make sure that you're adequately prepped to what's coming. And unless you have faith in a greater power, and that is God himself, I don't know how you're going to endure this madness, especially when Christ says that men's hearts will be failing them for fear as to what is to come.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say is for the ordinary person, as you correctly have pointed out, just surviving. And of course, if you can keep somebody right at the edge, which of course is what they do by forcing them to borrow money and charging rates and so on and so forth. So just sheer survival from one day to the next is sufficient to keep you completely controlled. And I totally agree with you about your faith, and that is the release from all of these worldly pressures. But for the majority of people, they sort of think about, like when Pope was criticizing Stalin, and Stalin's response was, the Pope? How many divisions has he got? And, it's such a cynical thing of challenging the Pope saying, look, your religion will save you, and the Pope, Stalin, is saying, no, he can't save you. I've got more guns than he's got. And that's what people are confronted with, and why it's so difficult, I think, for them to surrender themselves in that way, a total surrender to their religion.
Well, it's true, but there's two aspects and two or three things here that you brought up with great points. Absolutely great points, because you get to the crux of the matter. When we discuss these things that are going on in the economy, okay, the one question that is always thrown back at us is, what can we do about it? Well, Guess what? Everybody's different, and everybody's in a different situation. Advice given to a purely secular person, a Gentile, is going to be much different than advice given to some lukewarm Christian who just goes to church, who believes in Christ but has no power, no authority, and no understanding, to a third advice given to somebody who walks in the kingdom and walks with power. The advice given in these three things are much different, okay, and that's where we've got to temper this, because it's not one size fits all. What you were saying about getting on V of what this time says, does not the Scripture also say, there's going to be a falling away of the church, get out of her?
Yeah,
the church
absolutely.
The church system is as complicit as the political system, as the banking system. And yet we ask why there's cognitive dissonance and why there's just apathy. It's because people won't leave the destruction that is the church system, okay?
Yeah.
They won't leave that. So if they can't even leave that, even though there is absolute no discernment and nothing in the church of power, then it's going to be nearly impossible to try to tell them the things that are coming. Obviously, many of them are going to be unemployed. They're getting their welfare checks or their unemployment to the best of their ability or whatever. But because they deal with their small, short-term problems, they're not going to look up and see the bigger problems that are looming on the horizon. And here's the thing. If they haven't ever had the trust and be able to walk and have God's manifestation with their smaller problems, they never. You can't flip it on like a light switch. They're not going to be able to call on God for trust in the bigger problems. You know, how many times has somebody said, would you pray for me? I've got this ailment. Pray that the doctor will heal me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
If I was the Almighty, I would sit there and go, you know what? No, you've chosen your trust. Your trust is in that doctor. Don't use my name, because he's a jealous God.
But America was never a secular nation. I mean, when I look around at this lukewarm, dumbed down, the mega church, and it's just look at, your 501c3s, and you look at the legislation, and you take the regulation, you take the rules, and everything else. We know that Obama's a Marxist megalomaniac, and the powers that be want this new world order. It's the playbook to take as much wealth from America as possible, and death is imminent. The Anglo-American financial empire is collapsing. The system's rigged. We're heading towards a third world country status. I think the point you made is excellent, because in this nightmare, Jesus is the only true peace. And I mean, that dispensation of grace is fastly approaching a cutoff with God's people too.
Well, I think so. And, that's got to be the base foundation. If you can get strong in your trust and realize that, you know what, if I lose everything, then my trust, like with Job, even if you slay me, God, I'm going to trust you. It doesn't matter. Even if you lose everything, whether it's you lose your job, you lose your house, your families, whatever. If you can walk in that, and then you can take it to the next level and say, you know what, Father, you are a keeper of your promises. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. Your word is infallible. Okay, you reward those who trust. You know my needs. I stand here waiting for you to take care of them. Okay, then you see the manifestation. The kingdom is not in words but in power. We've lost that fact. We don't see miracles today because we've lost that fact, because it's not the fact that we don't have faith. The problem is that the word is trust, but the Latin Vulgate changed it to faith. Go ahead.
I just wanted to step in for a minute to give a secular example of what I think you're saying. When I was at the university, I didn't have my PhD, and we had a president who said, if you don't have a PhD, you don't exist, and you've got to have it to get tenure and so on. And I really wanted to keep the job. I loved teaching and so on. And one dean in particular always wrote me about it every time he saw me. How's that doctorate going? Oh, yeah. And my wife said to me one day, she said, Tim, next time he asks you, tell him you've scrapped it. And I thought, well, I can't do that. I want the job. She said, do it. And I'll never forget, it was May the 12th, 1983, outside the dean's office. He came out of the office, and he said, how's that famous doctorate going? And I said, it is. I've abandoned it. And he completely changed. Oh, you can't do that. You're our best teacher. You're our most favorite professor. You can't do that. We need you. And it suddenly dawned on me, and my wife and I talked about it that evening, I had given him the power over me. And by surrendering that control, I took back to myself. And it seems to me what we're talking about here is that citizens are bought off by the material world and by the things that they think they need to cope, that by surrendering to that, they then take the power unto themselves. Is there any logic in any of that to what you're saying?
No, you said one of the absolute four fundaments, because think about it. If you work for a corporation or a company, you surrender your power to the boss. He can make you do things that you would not normally do. If you sign up, think about it. You have to sign up to be a member and join a database in a church. Okay, you surrender your beliefs to be under that church denomination or pastor's beliefs. You surrender yourself. You surrender your money when you give it to a 401k for the bankers to hold and use for 30 years. Okay, we are willing to surrender because, one, we don't have trust in God. We can't think of today. The Scripture says, "Don't worry about tomorrow."
Yep.
Think about today, because I have already taken care of the evils thereof. People can't think in the today. Are my needs taken care of today? Do I have everything I need today? You know what? Thank you, Father. Tomorrow we'll deal with it. No, people are. When you worry about the past, you have regret. When you worry about the future, you have fear. Both of these things are what keeps us from a relationship with the Almighty. So He wants to eliminate those. If we can do that and focus on the today, what are my needs today? What are my problems today? What are my issues today? That's one of the hard parts when you see all these things coming, these economic things, the world changing, the communication. We feel lost because we've created these fears, about the unknown. I don't know if the NSA bugs my phone. Frankly, I don't care. But a lot of people do. They're scared to death, and they make choices and decisions based on a bugaboo and a fear.
Yeah. Isn't that the point, though, that I'm making, that in fact it's the individual that surrenders the control, and that once you say, no, I'm not going to let you have that control anymore, you take it back, you are then in control of your own destiny. And isn't that what I think the religion and the belief in God is all about?
Well, yeah, but you have to surrender to somebody. I'd rather surrender to the creator of the universe than to surrender to some man with a title.
Well, V and Ken, do you find it interesting that we see all this revelation come to light? We see the lukewarm church. We see this ancient Babylonian mystery school, banking families, the Illuminati kingpins. We see the same book playing out. I mean, the Rothschild. It's the same stuff in 1907 when he crashed the New York Stock Exchange. We see all the signs. Everything is leading up to where it says we're supposed to be. And yet, people will believe in the evil, sinister, maniacal, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. They'll believe in all the evil, but, don't want to talk about Jesus Christ as my Savior, though. You find that interesting?
No, absolutely. I think people are just so hung up on the negative, they don't look at the absolute positive. I think, people talk about, the elites. Look, the thing is this. These are human beings. And I don't care if they're supernaturally charged by demonic entities. It means nothing to me, right? Because what has really always fascinated me is that I've never seen people root so hard for the losing team. Because that's what they are. They are members of the losing team, right? They're not brilliant, okay? They're not infallible. They're not as great as some of these pundits you hear on talk radio talk about, saying, they're invincible, we're all screwed, and there's nothing we can do. Look, we serve the Almighty God. We serve the King of Kings. We serve the Lord of Lords. I mean, think about it. These idiots are hoping that one day they can create a cybernetic body in which to download their consciousness into. This way they can... Exactly. So this way they can escape judgment. How stupid are they? Don't these morons know that the believers, the Christians, that once we die, we're actually going to be coming back with the King of Kings? Don't they know that we're going to get a glorified body? Don't they know that when God gave Adam dominion over the earth, that means total and complete control over the very elements, the very rudiments of this third dimension that we're living in? Don't they know that our bodies, once glorified, will have total rule and total dominion? So you take a believer with a glorified body and you pit him against an elitist with a cybernetic interface, it's a joke. It is like taking a gnat and throwing that gnat into a ring with a lion. There's just no comparison. That's how idiotic they are.
And we're not fighting against flesh and blood anyway. I mean,
we're not.
But against rulers, against authorities,
correct,
against powers of darkness. I mean, against the spiritually forces in the heavenly places. So, once people can get a handle on the fact that we're not just fighting, these Illuminati kingpin long-term families that go back to the Nimrodian era, we're fighting against Satan and his minions here, really. And it's really, like you guys said, it's a spiritual battle.
Today I was in my kitchen and I was thinking how stupid Satan is, to laugh at that, because of the simple fact that you got to understand, these are finite beings. They're not God. They're not omnipresent. They're not omniscient. They're not, they don't have complete rule and reign. They don't. And they make mistakes. They make tons of mistakes. And the worst part of it is they have to deal with a very low class of human being called elitist, which is a megalomaniac, insecure, low IQ, inbred ingrate. Yeah. That's who Lucifer has to deal with. I wouldn't blame him that it took him 10,000 years trying to get his new world order. Look at who he's dealing with, a bunch of morons. So I'm really not concerned, and that's what people need to understand. Once you are plugged in to Christ, once you're plugged in to the Almighty, this doesn't matter anymore at the end of the day. The best thing you can do is be prepared with what you need to do, with what you have to do. But what you can't prepare yourself for, if you have God, He can get you through everything. There's one thing that Ken talked about, that we have the power of the Creator within us. And one of the things, so often I've met missionaries who were in the jungles of Southeast Asia, starving. And they will literally pray for food, and all of a sudden God will tell them, the Holy Spirit will tell them, hey, look under that bushel over there. They look under that bushel, there it is, hard-boiled eggs. How do you explain that? How do you explain that except that when the Lord says that I will give my angels charge over thee, that He literally means that? And that's the hope of the believer. For the believer, there's hope in this thing. This is great news. I'm glad the economic system is screwed up. I'm glad the world's going to hell in a handbasket, because my Savior told me that once you see these things come to be, lift up your head, for your redemption draws nigh. But for the unbeliever, oh my God, you got nothing but fear and desperation. So when we're on tonight, we're painting an economic picture for you guys. And that solution for some will be, certain stocks, bonds. The majority of the solution will be getting into precious metals. But the ultimate solution and the blessed hope is a relationship with Jesus Christ. And this is coming from me. I was a former atheist. Ken, if you want to add anything to that, brother, go ahead and hammer it.
No, I'm in complete agreement. And this has always been the hardest thing. In a short amount of time, it's really difficult to learn what somebody's trust level is, and really it's all been about trust. We talk about faith. The New Testament is chock full of the word faith, but in the Old Testament, the word faith only shows up twice. 127 times it has the word trust, but only 2 times it has faith, because one is a thing of the mind, and trust requires evidence from both sides. If you have trust of a mustard seed, then you can move mountains. If, and then there's the second side, evidence, you do not doubt. Okay? There's a requirement on both sides in trust. In faith, how many people have ever met Jesus? Were told by a missionary, hey, you need to trust in Jesus. Okay, say a prayer. They've never met Him. So everything in belief system is in the mind. Okay? You believe in the tenets of the gospel, and who Jesus did and what He did and why He did. Okay, I have that belief. That's in my mind. Now what? And the problem is that, we have never, the mindset that America was ordained by God as a Christian nation. No, what happened was, when people came over here in the 1600s, in the 1700s, okay, they themselves were the temple. We are the church. We have the Spirit of God within us. He does not reside in temples made by hands. We had a vast majority of people who came into this nation at the very beginning who were God-fearing and who were Spirit-filled. Okay, that's why America became successful, because it was God first, and then the physical land, the country, the sovereign nation, etc. We had a lot of instances where the secular beliefs and controls, actually, we shouldn't have had a civil war. We shouldn't have treated the Native Americans as badly as we did. There were still pockets of the government in America that had nothing to do with God and God's dominion. Okay? You can see these things. What was happening then was greed, was the struggle, the assassinations of the presidents because of the banking powers wanting that central bank, the attacks on Andrew Jackson, the death of James Garfield, what we saw with McKinley, what we saw with JFK. Okay, these things were still trying to take dominion over the country. But at its core, the people, for the most part, had a love and reverence of God. And so we prospered because of that relationship and love and reverence of God. Then we cross over into the 1960s. Okay? The gospel changed. What used to be, repent ye for the kingdom of God is at hand, trust in that gospel, suddenly became Jesus is love, became so many other denominations. We have 3,500 denominations of a church that is supposed to follow Christ, but they're all built on belief systems, doctrines, and false, different interpretations of the Bible by men. Why do we have such a division? We have a 3,500 denominational division of a single body of Christ. Is it any wonder why we are so divided here in the country? Why it's so divided in politics? Why it's so divided economically? And why, at a certain point, it becomes overwhelming? And I think this was what the real purpose is that spiritual enemy behind what was going on had to separate and divide the country and make it brother against brother, even Christian against Christian. Think about the enmity, even, say, with Romney. Why did we even have to question, Romney is a Mormon, so should he be president? JFK was a Catholic, so he should. So we have this division amongst ourselves, even amongst the church. It's almost like Jesus, he's a secondary. My denomination is more important than Christ. Right. You have that division. You have that division starting to get built up in the people going into the 20th century. Well, the same thing happens is over time, because people are so divided in their religious beliefs, our grandfathers who used to be the ones to stand at our politicians' door and say, in the council chamber saying, "What the heck are you doing?" We move into the later decades. Everybody's so consumed with work, especially after World War II, and their careers, and this and that no longer do we look at our politicians and they can do what they want. No longer do we look at our banking, because all we got to do is give our money to a broker for a 401k and IRA for 30 years and not have to worry about it. We no longer have to do the things that we used to do. We no longer have to take responsibility for our actions and choice. And as 2 or 3 generations have occurred since that time, this is what we have in America today. This is why I really disagree with those who say we've got to take America back. No. You might have a few people that are willing to do it, but the vast majority of people, just like in revolutionary times, are content to live under King George.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing, is with truth, people have to understand, truth requires responsibility. And that's something that nobody wants these days, is responsibility. That's why people ask me all the time, well, V, how come, so many people, even so many Christians, don't want to deal with their finances? They'd rather have somebody else deal with it. Well, it's simple, because they'd rather have a fund manager, a broker, deal with their retirement fund and this fund and that fund, because they don't want to deal with it. They're too busy focused on their career. Look at this. I mean, even in church, what do? We take our kids, we drop them into Sunday school. It's the same, which basically models the same failed Prussian school type system. Why? Because there's no men, there's no women, there's no responsibility. So the responsibility of raising our kids and instructing our kids, we lop off to somebody else. The responsibility of maintaining our finances and managing our finances is lopped off to somebody else. Our responsibility of holding our elected officials' feet to the fire, we don't care about that either. All we care about is my four, no more, and am I bringing enough money in this week to cover the bills. That's all we're consumed with. And you cannot ask for a better population. And then whatever free time we have, we're not spending that free time on intellectual pursuits. We're wasting our brain on mindless entertainment. I mean, Hitler couldn't ask for a better population to control than what we have in modern-day America. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Sheila, I'll just jump in. I was trying to think of a quote from Hitler earlier, and I found it. And Hitler said, "What luck for leaders that people don't think."
Yep.
The cynicism.
Well, it's just so fascinating. When you look back in the history of America, I mean, it was anchored on gold and silver. Gold stood as the standard, and it protected the people from these corrupt banksters. And for more than 50 years, what's amazing to me is gold fluctuated only, I think a penny. And, you mentioned, of course, Ken Andrew Jackson. I mean, he was a sworn enemy of the central banking system. And look at Jefferson said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up will deprive the people of their property, and essentially they'll wake up and their children will be homeless. I mean, these guys knew that these banking institutions were more dangerous to the liberties than standing armies. And, it's so funny because we have a continent that is so wrapped up in the love of money. And I mean, Christ said, for the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. So it's interesting that people will stab each other for a toaster on Black Friday, but they don't, seem to care of really what's coming down the pike here.
Well, we also are in a society of self-gratification and me. Okay, this is what you see along the lines. It's also why so many Christians go church hopping, because they have this expectation of what they want, and if the pastor at this one church doesn't give them what they want, then they go hop to the next and hop to the next, because it's all about them. Okay.
Yeah.
The church has become a microcosm of society. One could say, did society become a microcosm of the church as the church changed? Well, one half or the other. This is why economics is a social science, not a mathematical, because it encompasses the social, cultural, financial, political, and even religious sides of humanity. So
sure.
When you look at economics, you're not talking about just numbers and what Wall Street's doing and what the real estate bubble is doing. No, you're talking about how are people affected by this. The people, why did they go into massive debt, mortgaging off their houses with second liens, et cetera, and buy all this stuff? Okay, there's an underlying current of that. So that's more what I look at, because that's the root cause. If people used to be frugal. Our
yes.
grandparents, when they came out of World War II and the Depression, they said, you know what, I'm never going to go through that again, and my kids are not going to go through that again. But you know what? Go another 70 years, and we went through it again.
Well, it's interesting what you just said, because church entertainment, it's move them in, move them out, listen to the PowerPoint presentation, throw your feet up on the rail, grab a coffee, a cookie, and let's listen to a PowerPoint on 5 ways to become Joel Osteen. I mean, it is really quite frightening.
Yeah, it's the way. Think about bureaucracy. Think about the way society forces us into models. 9 to 5. Get up at 7. Be at work at get done till 4. Everything is completely micromanaged for us.
Yes,
that's not the way. As you said, when we used to be in an agrarian society, everything used to be by the seasons. You get up at sunlight. You do your chores. You would rush in the spring to plant the crops. You would just tend them a little bit during the day, or during the summer. You take care of your livestock, and in the fall you would rush to do the harvest, and then you would rest during the winter. Okay, there was no real time. The sun and the cycles did the time. Now clocks, radio, television, everything. Society forces you into this created paradigm that people are not. Deep down, they don't want to be under this bondage.
That's exactly a good word, yes.
Yeah. Sheila, can I just to expand on that point, I've done a lot of work with the schooling system and its problems and so on. And
you mean Common Core Central?
well, yeah. Whenever you get those sorts of words strung together, there's something wrong with it. It just a red flag goes up. But there's a couple of things about what we've been talking about here that I think are germane. One of the ones when we're talking about economics and the social sciences, in Darwin's day, and I use that deliberately because Darwin, I think, was very pivotal in what's going on in today's world. In Darwin's day, there were only 2 faculties in the universities. One was the natural sciences, and the other was the humanities. And the humanities, of course, were basically the whole concept of humans and their spirituality and religion and so on. But Darwin comes along, and he was used by the scientific world to get rid of religion effectively. Now, Darwin himself was an atheist, but what came out of that was that when Darwin says, well, there's no such thing as God, then the question becomes, well, then who put us here? And the secularists, of course, replaced it with the social sciences. The social sciences are now the largest faculties in all universities, and I call them human navel-gazing. They're an attempt to show how humans are not only different than all the other animals, but superior to all the other animals. And it's a secularist approach. One of the reasons that environmentalism has caught on is because it's provided another form of religion for the young people, which has, of course, made it attractive. So that's a very critical part. The other
in other words, Kim, replace the Ten Commandments with worshiping Mother Gaia, real nice religion offered to the younger.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things, by the way, I talk to high schools an awful lot, and I was in Abbotsford just recently, and I said, the economy is going to be real tough. There are not going to be any jobs for you guys. And the response is, the government will look after me. They are so conditioned to that as the way out that you see the problem. But so we set the Darwin aside, and by the way, Darwin is seen as the progenitor of capitalism, survival of the fittest, and I find it amusing that the left, who agree with Darwin but hate capitalism, it's like that contradiction between people who are in favor of abortion but oppose hanging. Somehow what goes on in between there. But the other point about this is that the educational system that we have developed, and this goes to the last point that was being made, Aristotle pointed out that the education system of today, and Mortimer Adler, who wrote his biographies, brought this to my attention in something called the Phaedra complex, but it doesn't fit humans and the way they develop and the way they grow and the way that their whole physical natures change through puberty and so on. Because Aristotle pointed out that you could have a math genius of 5 years old, but you cannot have a philosophical genius of 5 years old. And what he was distinguishing was between the things that we can learn innately, the basic things that we need to survive in life, and it's like that poster that said everything I needed to know to survive I learned in kindergarten. But then, but we keep this, and then back to Aristotle. So he says you should stay in school till you're about 12 or 13, then go out and learn about life and yourself and the world, and then when you're 30, then you go back to school and start to understand with the experience of life what it's all about. But of course, we created through the Industrial Revolution this whole system of we've got to produce the little work unit for the job market, and we've got to and the parents have to work, so the school's got to become a babysitting agency, and so on and so forth. And of course, the kids after the age of 12, they're being taught subjects that they can't relate to at all because they can't relate to them in time or in what's important to them. I mean, when you start talking 100 years of history to a 13-year-old to who tomorrow is forever away, it just completely doesn't work. And so I see all of these things integrated and related to what is confronting the world today. And I think it's why, by the way, you see in the environmental debate and that argument that suddenly here comes Darwin again with Richard Dawkins, God is dead, and the secularist approach to things. I see all of these things as integrated, interrelated, and we need to understand them to understand what's happening, and then be able to resist. And part of the problem is, of course, as Sheila, you and I have talked about, the schools have become places of indoctrination rather than education. And one of the ways you see this is traditionally the young people came into the university, challenged the old professors with the old ideas. Now the young people are coming in conservative ideals, and they're and the challenge is coming from the older professors who are saying, no, you've lost your way. Even secularly, they're saying we've lost our way. But of course, in terms of the religious, they completely lost their way. So there's a whole bunch of ideas there they've thrown out. Just to
weigh
get
in on that,
feedback.
Ken and V.
Yeah.
Go ahead, V.
The whole thing comes down to what and I kind of highlighted. That most people don't want to deal with it. And one of the things that when I was talking about it, that kind of came to my mind was this. I don't know if back in 2007 or so, if any of you seen this movie. It's actually one of my favorites, and very so often, ever so often, Hollywood releases something where art imitates life. The movie was starring this British actor by the name of Clive Owen, and it was titled The International. Has anyone seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. I see it, yep.
In the movie The International, and folks, it's true, and that's why people have asked me, hey, why don't you just show your face and expose yourself in public? You watch that movie, you'll understand why. In the movie, there's a scene where one of the characters is talking to the New York DA, and they're talking about the whole fiasco about this multinational bank that does everything from murdering people to running all sorts of financial scams. But there's a line in there that's so profound that's always stuck with me. And that line is this. The character says, what you need to remember is that there's what people want to hear, there's what people want to believe, there's everything else, then there's the truth. And the truth means responsibility, which is why everyone dreads it. And that is basically the whole entire crux of what we're talking about and why people are not on board with being involved and exposing and putting an end to the educational system. Being active in our community and in our society is because it warrants responsibility. And that's something that nobody wants because, after all, who has time? Because, Dad's got to come home after a hard day's work and it's Monday night, so he's got to kick his feet up on his lazy boy and turn on Monday Night Football. That's more important. I mean, they have done a masterful job of taking things that have no meaning, trinkets, baubles, sports. Okay, I'm not even going to call it sports because Hemingway said it best. Real sports are mountaineering, bullfighting, and race car driving. Those are real sports because you can get killed in that. The rest are all just games. That's what Hemingway said, and I tend to agree with him. So we've taken games, which football, baseball, basketball, if you look at the 20s and 30s, and that was something that kids would play. Okay, it wasn't, athletes weren't getting paid billions of dollars or the equivalent thereof back then, and all these endorsement deals. They've taken the things that are meaningless and made them important. They made it so bad that men spend Wednesday nights and Friday nights at their buddy's house and a whole cadre of friends playing fantasy football. And if you're not with fantasy football, there's also fantasy baseball and fantasy basketball. This is the kind of erroneous, detached existence that all of us are living. You go to dinner, you got mom and dad sitting across the table from each other. You got the kids, and even the baby has his own iPhone, and they're all texting or surfing or playing a game. This is what's going on these days. And like I said, it's the most idyllic population. If you're a tyrannical dictator like Obama, you love this. You love this. Because half the population is doing this, and the other half is dependent on welfare. It's a win-win situation. Ken, if you want to say something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say that's why he gave them iPhones.
More than anything, okay, and I think this is what Jesus was trying to say about these times when you see these things. Look, the world's in a transition. We are transitioning all of society, the world, the economics, the finance, all of this, the religious, the spiritual. We're transitioning. This is the equivalent of what happened after the fall of the Roman Empire, where Europe had to deal with 700 years to 1,000 years of dark ages. okay, where you had the transition from Martin Luther breaking away from the 1,000-year-old, Roman church system. You have these transitions going right now. Okay, the West has been in charge since the Renaissance. Before then, China was really the greatest empire, after Egypt and Greece.
But it was actually Ken, I just want to say something real quick. It was actually India and China. They were the dominant world powers, and India dominated China philosophically. A lot of the Chinese philosophies goes back to ancient India, and the first grid city was in India, and I think it was also Hemingway that said this also, when man began to dream of civilization, he dreamed it first in India. But go ahead, you were saying.
Yeah, no problem. But the point being is that we are going through a transition. The East is rising again.
Yes.
Okay? The West is failing. We worry and we look at all the tiny little things. Well, to tell the truth, V and I are preaching the exact same things that we started preaching after the credit crisis 5 years ago. Okay, the Gerald Celentes and the Peter Schiffs and the Mark Fabers and the Jim Rogers are preaching the same things 10 years ago leading up to the housing bubble and the credit crisis. Okay, they have not changed. What they are saying is that for those who did not take the advice back then, it's too late. Let me give you an example of that. There was a writer who works out of Australia, and he wrote a op-ed this week saying that the potential is now great because of the sovereign demand, the exceptional demand for sovereign gold coins. The UK Royal Mint actually had to shut down because they're out of things. That shortages and rationing are on the horizon.
Yeah.
Don't worry about price. We get completely. If you were to go to the Shanghai Exchange, the futures market in Shanghai and Hong Kong, where they actually deliver physical gold, which the COMEX doesn't do it anymore. But if you do it there, that you're paying $200 premium right now.
Yeah, anywhere between $1,600 to $1,800 an ounce.
Yeah, gold prices are really $1,600 to $1,800. They're not the 12. Americans should be dying for the fact that our COMEX has kept spot prices down, because when you go to your coin dealers, your premium's lower. Buy it now. But the point is for those who say, okay, I haven't bought any gold, I can't afford it anywhere. Well, you know what? This right here coming out of Australia, because they are in tune with the mines. Here's something else. When you take a look at stocks, why have the mining stocks been completely destroyed when the stock market in all three phases, the S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ, why are mining stocks still at rock bottom prices? Well, it's not because they're necessarily manipulating them, but let me tell you what's going on. The cartels in Mexico are starting to hijack the shipments from the mines to the refiners. Okay, you have strikes going on in South Africa. Mines are shutting down. You have nationalization in Venezuela and Argentina. Okay, the mines are shutting down. They are not a good investment. This is causing a shortage and a supply, a lack of supply in outrageous things. Something else. We talk about how much the Chinese have been buying from the West and importing. They've been buying and importing physical gold at the rate of 1,000 tons per month for the last 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible, hey?
There's nothing out there. So so for 5 years we've been talking about the need to buy gold and silver, okay, as a hedge. The importance about gold and silver is this. Okay, the expectation this year is that there's going to be a currency reset. Jim Willey says international gold trade settlement note and a currency reset. Currency reset, what that's going to do is they're going to take all the nations and value their assets. And then they're going to make a list starting from like 1 to say 250. And they're going to rank each nation depending on what kind of assets they have. Well, since we don't have any manufacturing industry, we don't have any gold, We've got our oil reserves. Okay, we're probably going to be ranked in the top 10, but probably not in the top 5 anymore. Maybe we might be in the top 5, but point is they're going to start from that point. They're going to start devaluing internal currencies, lopping off 30 to 90% of the value of the currency. And currencies then, when they decide to do this, when the petrodollar goes bye-bye and China brings in the international trade settlement note, is going to be the only, that gold-backed international trade note is going to be the only way that a nation trades with another nation.
Well, let me ask you this, Ken. I mean, a currency reset, doesn't that mean you lose your wealth? I mean, this global reset, I mean, if China monetizes gold, that makes it very high. They have a lot of gold. They've stockpiled boatloads of it. So, I mean, now, what does that look like for the guy on this main street, the Joe lunchbox carrier?
That you just hit the nail on the head. The currency reset is inevitable. This is why the Fed is and the government is borrowing till tomorrow, because they know currency reset's coming. Once it came to that point that they realized this, that's why they're printing till the cows come home, because it's going to get washed away in a currency reset anyway.
Right.
China is actually lending out and printing more money, yuan, than the West is. But China also knows that they are the ones who are going to create this new thing, so their debt's going to be wiped away as it begins with. But they just provided 2 new licenses to banks inside China to sell gold coins to their people. This is how China is going to instantly, when the new system comes in, the Chinese people who are actually buying gold, and as V said, lining up by the tens of thousands outside of retailers, and they're going to do banks. Those people are instantly going to be middle class. China doesn't have to build up a middle class. They're going to instantly be middle class, okay? But the U.S., all of a sudden, your dollars, they're all going to come home. The devaluation currency reset's going to do, and your money's going to be worth about 30 to 50 to 60% less than it is now, your purchasing power. Well, we think in terms of the West, okay? We always hear these guys talk about, gold should really be at $3,000 an ounce. Okay, it might get as high as $10,000. Or Jim Sinclair, who is now on the board running the commodities exchange for
Hong Kong commodities.
Hong Kong. He said 50,000 because he realizes that the U.S. and the West is not going to be the one monetizing gold. China will be. And China is probably going to do, for that gold trade note, at $50,000 an ounce. Well, if you have 5 to 10 ounces of gold, okay, boom, the U.S. is going to be willing to buy it in dollar currency, even though it's going to be devalued dollar currency, because the U.S. is going to have some form of asset to be able to start trading internationally, or nobody's going to trade. Okay, that's how you preserve your wealth. You may have 5,000 U.S. dollars, and it gets devalued by 40%. So now you've got 2,000 U.S. dollars or whatever. But if you have 5 ounces of gold, now all of a sudden you can get say 20,000 U.S. dollars for each ounce of gold. Now you're back to 50, 60, 70. You've actually made money. And since the currency has been devalued, you're going to have deflation in the prices. So the price of the goods you are going to be wealthy by any form of standard. That's how gold and silver works as insurance for what happens in the fiat currency market. People don't understand that. They think, we're just going to barter with gold and silver. That may happen for a short period of time, right, but they will eventually have to create a stable medium of currency, just like they had to during the Civil War when Lincoln created the greenback, because he needed some sort of stable to be able to transact, to be able to buy guns and buy material and buy whatever. Eventually, it's going to get devalued, and eventually it was done with the promise that you could trade it in for, an equivalent amount of gold and silver after the fact. But that's what was done. Okay, it was a short-term thing until you could do this, and that's what they're going to do is they're going to have to recreate a new currency. It's going to be devalued, and it's going to be internal only. Because
Ken, you brought up a couple of points. I want to ask you a question. You just mentioned greenback. I really want to know, and maybe you can answer this. I mean, you had a constitution that said no state shall emit the issue of unbacked paper promissory notes. I mean, you had obviously Section 19 evoked death for debasing money. Like, how did heads not roll at that time? Outright debasing is fractional reserve banking, but it's just incredible. It's circling right back.
Yeah, well, back then we were in a civil war, so needless to say, habeas corpus was done. The President Lincoln was ruling by decree. The fact of the matter is that to sell it to the people, he had a choice. Okay, the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about states' rights, and it was about the foreign central banks trying to get a foothold in the U.S.
I agree.
So what the Rothschilds over there in their 5 sons in all the balance of power system that was in Europe, they were just salivating because they were going to loan money to both sides at like 30 to 50% interest. But Lincoln said, I'm not going to borrow money from you. I'm going to issue bonds just like the way Congress used to issue currency, okay, the way it was before the Fed. We're going to issue bonds, and we're going to use this greenback as a medium of payment to be able to buy stuff, knowing that eventually it would devalue. But he made the promise to the people, hey, we need to use this because we need to increase the money supply to fight a war. But when everything is done, we will recognize it for its value, and we will pay you in gold and silver after the fact. Well, besides the fact that you could trade in gold and silver up until the 1920s and 30s and the end of the gold system, there were actual paper money, i.e. the silver certificates, gold certificates, etc., that were recognized. I could turn this into the bank for gold or silver. It was a way to store, but unfortunately we had the Fed created in 1913, and they misused that and started leveraging even back then.
Well, it's incredible to me that, when you think about the Fed, it's absolutely, I guess Bretton Woods didn't, think about that little thing about circulating so much money. It had a major flaw, essentially. And it's interesting. They've been sort of the gold hen guarding the fox cage for the last 100 years. It's just incredible to me.
Well, the Bretton Woods really was just a way to extend the Nazi banking system. The BIS.
Yeah.
That's really what it was. You had to have a central point for nations to be able to do international transactions. The days of just trading with your neighbor or sailing Marco Polo with a boatload of silks to trade for spices, those days were done. Everything was done using a medium of specie. So they weren't going to do it with gold and silver anymore. The British Empire was dead.
Weigh in on that, V.
Yeah. I'd just make a comment. Somebody said the sun never set on the British Empire. Somebody else said it was because you couldn't trust the English in the dark.
Does it essentially, something that really just mind boggles me. We saw the first little beta test with Cyprus. The mainstream didn't touch it. People didn't bat an eye. And a lot of people were saying afterwards, well, it's just, they're trying to loot our bank accounts. But it's about creating a society that's no longer sovereign. When you're looking at people on the street digging in trash cans, because look at this biggest bill ever passed into law, the entire G20 signs off on this bail-in. That is just staggering that, bank deposits can be used to capitalize the banks. You're no longer a depositor, you're a non-secured creditor or maybe even a shareholder getting just pennies on the dollar. Bail-in equals clean out, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing with Dodd-Frank, when people are going to realize this was the biggest bill ever passed in the history of Congress. 30,000 pages, 5,000 lobbyists, and $30 billion spent by the big 6 mega banks, all to ensure that they will be, number one, better capitalized, number two, that when this collapse does occur, you will be absolutely fleeced from all your wealth. And that's the whole thing. And every single Western government has signed up to. The Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians did it back in May with the passing of their budget. The Europeans were the first beta test because of the ESM, the European Stability Model, Cyprus being the first. We've seen the pension confiscations occurring within Poland. You've seen all sorts of financial shenanigans occurring with the Italian banks that are in Italy, the austerity that is being rolled out. This is it, folks. I mean, unless there's a miracle and America wakes up and did exactly what Iceland did, saying that, hey, this, 97% of this debt is not our debt. This is the banksters' debt, and they begin to start jailing these banksters as well as these politicians, then there's no hope for it. You see what I'm saying? So there is examples of what happens when individuals and we as a people sit idly on our hands, and then there's an example of what happens when people actually stand up and throw these bankers out. And that's what we got to do. Enough's enough already. And with Dodd-Frank, what about Wells Fargo coming out saying that they're going to start charging depositors $5 for every deposit? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was thinking about something else. Just like they use the bank holiday to confiscate the gold and silver from the safety deposit boxes and that. Well,
right.
If hyperinflation really starts to go, especially price-wise and monetarily, but price-wise, how best to deal with that inflation by doing a bank holiday and removing all that money from the system, okay, from people's bank accounts or whatever, boom, you've instantly deflated or you've eliminated inflation because you've removed their ability to even have money to spend.
Right.
Just a quick idea here. We talked earlier about learning from history. One of the things that frustrates me is that in North America here, and particularly Obama proposing things which he led people to believe were genuinely new. The problem is they were things that had already been tried and failed. And so we talked about learning from history, but Europe is exactly what we're trying to warn about. It's going through it now, and one of the reasons people see rioting in Greece and people protesting on the streets and so on, and armed battles and so on. But it's partly because they don't have the political ability. I mean, I know people in England and the frustration they have with them being told what to do by some bureaucrat in Brussels, and there's nothing they can do about it. They don't get to vote for that bureaucrat in Brussels. They have no control. They've lost central control by subjugating themselves to the European Union. And I'm hoping that Britain will break away and raise the whole issue and illustrate the dangers that you have when you surrender your national freedom, and then of course with that goes your individual freedom.
I mean, let's call it for what it is. That whole European bureaucrat is basically the Politburo. That's all it is.
Yep.
And yep. I hope that Nigel Farage and the UKIP party, the United Kingdom Independence Party, I mean, they've gotten some huge, massive gains. If people don't know, the UKIP is the British equivalent of the Tea Party. And they've gotten massive, massive gains. And, folks, I'll be honest with you. I mean, May 16th, there are people talking about the American Spring. They're hoping for a turnout between 16 and 30 million people converging in the Capitol to protest and to stand in Barry Soetoro's house and tell him to get out. And this also goes with Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell as well as Boehner. So there's a movement here. I mean, there are people that are fed up, and if my whole thing is you just can't stop at the politicians, because you got to go for the head of the snake. People need to understand and begin to see the puppet master behind the curtain. And I think it's far time that we go after these banksters as well. Otherwise, we just throw out the politicians and purge the political system. Eventually, the tentacles of banking comes back in. And that's the problem we've been having for the last 200 some odd years.
How do you go from Bernanke, the nightmare, to Janet Yellen, communist chair of the Fed, married to a guy demonizing the free market, Mrs. QE forever, the perfect yes woman, and she's always cementing Bernanke's legacy, rubber stamping everything. What, she just comes in and seals up the wrap of the collapse, Mrs. Keynesianism? Like, I don't get that.
Well, the thing is this also. You look at who they have arrayed for this final closing act of their playbook. And this is the final play. We're in the fourth quarter. Sorry to use the sports analogy, but, I just had to. Now, this is the final play. I mean, the clock's ticking. So what they did is they got 3 of their best strikeout artists. And you got Janet Yellen, okay, who has no shame, who will gladly go down with the ship because this woman is completely warped and has no idea of what real data is, and it fell out of the sky and hit her in the head. You have Jack Lew, our old Wall Street buddy over here, Jackie Boy from Citigroup. The man was a failure, an absolute failure. The man failed in every single endeavor he's ever done. He's been absolutely horrible at it. So what do you do with a loser like him? Simply, you put him in the Fed. You put him in the Treasury. You put a guy like Jack Lew in the Treasury because he has no shame. Yellen has no shame. Barack Obama clearly has no shame. So you got 3 strikeout artists let loose on the nation, and now we're going to reap the fruits of their stupidity, and it's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be horrific to see what happens. Ken, I know you got something to say about good old Janet.
Yeah, my belief is that Janet's been around the Fed for a couple centuries. They drag her out like a skeleton, for parties and that.
Ken, I don't want to interject you, but from what I hear is that Janet Yellen has been in the Fed since 1913. But continue.
Yeah.
The ghost floating around.
Exactly. But the thing about Janet Yellen is she's the equivalent of Lyndon Baines Johnson. Okay.
Oh, yikes.
She knows she has all the skeletons on everybody in the Fed. She knows where all the bodies are buried. I doubt if she necessarily buried them. She just paid attention and knows where they are. And I believe, in this is my opinion, we had Larry Summers, okay, earlier this year. Larry Summers was the number 1 leading candidate to get the Fed. Larry Summers is, as V knows, he's a fixer. So he would have been somebody who would have been almost like Volcker in 1980, would have come in and at least said, you know what, there's some weird stuff going here. We got to do a taper. We got to at least see what happens when we start pulling back on. He would have at least done some of that. Then all of a sudden, on a Sunday afternoon, in I think it was September, boop, Larry Summers pulls out his candidacy. No reason, no rhyme. He's never spoken of it. He just pulls out, and then Janet Yellen becomes the leading candidate. Well, I think she was probably given the option. Do you want to be the chairman of the Fed, the first female with all this power? Well, you are going to go down in history as the one who was there when it completely collapsed. That's going to be your price. That's the price you have to pay to get this position. And the thing about it is, with power, people are willing to do that because they have such an ego that they think that it's not going to actually occur.
Correct.
She doesn't think it's going to collapse because she is a Keynesian to the core. She believes that if the signs say that it's going down, I can print even more money because she's an ideologue. These people in Congress, the President Obama, these people in the banking system, they're ideologues. Okay?
Sure.
This is why Keynesianism has lasted ever since FDR's days and going forward, especially LBJ's days. They believe that, but you know what? The thing about it is somebody like Russia. Look what Russia is doing. Okay? Russia is actually understanding that the people need a spiritual base if they're going to actually be a strong country. So who would have imagined that a former KGB officer would become friends with the Russian Orthodox Church, who was probably terrorized for 70 years by the Communist Party. Okay, this is what they're understanding. China is actually making some decent reforms, especially economically, because one, they realize, you know what, we may have this military, and we may be the Communist Party, and we're brutal, but they also understand they have 1 point some odd billion people, and it's all those people who, there's so many different provinces in China. You have Muslims, you have natives, you have indigents, you have the Chinese people. If they decide to just tear down the Communist Party, they could do it. This is one of the reasons why they have kept the economic train going. So they understand that you need these things, and to really, you have to have the public support. What we see in the United States is that they are ideologues who are completely programmed and have this belief that their idols, their masters, the great Keynes, the liberal philosophies, the Clintons, this is why even Clinton and Obama continue to have such a big following, even though they have literally destroyed the country in their two presidential terms. Because people, if you create an idol for somebody, it's really difficult to get them. How many in the churches have this worship of their ministers? Their ministers could actually tell them straight out lies, Jim Jones, and they would believe it, and they would follow through to the death. We go back to the ancient times, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. You had after Jesus rose from the dead and the movement started. You had three primary sects of Jews: the Pharisees, Sadducees, and I think the Zealots. Okay, they were all vying for control, but they decided that at one point, we are strong enough to get rid of the Roman Empire. So they did a revolt and a revolution against the Roman Empire. We saw how that happened. Who in their right mind would challenge the Roman legions?
Oh, a bunch of Maccabees.
Insane ideologues who believe that no matter what indicators are in front of them, they have the ability to overcome it. This is Janet Yellen in a nutshell. And so we will see QE, even though she throws that little taper out, we'll either see QE in the shadow banking system of the Fed go to massive expansion, or we're going to see her just go hog wild in the buying up every toxic asset that's left on the planet.
Well, I guess hence the trial balloons to assess the public's reaction, I guess, then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not the public's reaction, the market's reaction. The public doesn't mean anything. It's the market's reaction. And if you notice, when they did the taper, the $10 billion taper, market went up. It didn't go down.
I mean, if we're not living in Wonderland, I don't know. I don't know what else is there. I mean, Ken, she could also pull the Paul Krugman method, which could possibly mean that she could actually stamp a $1 trillion coin and begin to pay off all the debt.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. But since it's printed from thin air anyway,
here's a hard asset for you.
That right there would be the same thing as a currency reset, because you remove so much paper or digital currency in this case from the system. Then all of a sudden prices go absolutely nuts because nobody has any valuation of what things are worth anymore.
No, correct. Absolutely.
But I mean, monetary inflation, price inflation, stagnate. I mean, that's a triple-headed beast, isn't it? Stagflation in there too.
But have you ever wondered why there hasn't been massive price inflation since the Fed's been doing this?
Yes,
we mentioned about it earlier. Velocity of money. The money is not getting Main Street, not at all, and that was done on purpose. This is the only way they could have done this whole mechanism. They say that the Fed's balance sheet is $4.6 trillion now, up from $800 billion at the start of 2009, 2008. But didn't we hear in congressional briefings and that there was $12 trillion that the Fed funneled to Europe to save their banking system?
Correct.
How come that $12 trillion isn't on their balance sheet? This is that behind-the-scenes shadow banking system. Okay, we're talking 12, 20, maybe even close to $100 trillion over the last 5 years have actually been moving back and forth in the system. And if you take a look at banks and economies, it has done nothing but make things worse. You can't pay off how leveraged this entire system is, even with say conservatively $20 to $30 trillion put into the liquidity put in the system. It's still on the edge of collapse every single day of the year.
I think how enormous.
That's frightening.
I think how enormous that is. You know, when you're that's why when I'm out there and I begin to hammer the point that this is a mathematical inevitability, you can't roll this back. You can't fix this. You see, this is the inevitable, and people will say, well, where's the collapse? It's happening all around you. You know, when this thing finally goes, that's what's going to make it so traumatic. And I feel sorry for those who are not prepared for what is to come and what's coming down the pike. That's what's going to shock people. You know, we've had it good for so long, and we thought it's always going to be somebody else. It's somebody else who loses their job. It's somebody else who gets murdered. It's somebody else who gets their cars broken into. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. But this time, it's going to be you, and it's going to be your wallet, and it's going to be your savings account. It's going to be your retirement, your home, your kids, your family, your future. And then all of a sudden, it's not somebody else. And all of a sudden, that's when the reality starts really kicking in. It's bad, folks. I mean, the system should have been purged. What should have been an isolated systemic problem that occurred in 2008 has run absolutely rampant by design, and now it's no longer what could have been a quarantine, isolated systemic issue, is now the whole entire system is buckling. And Ken talked about velocity of money, which there's no liquidity, and thus there's no liquidity. You look at the absolute. I'm talking about in Main Street. You look at the majority of the banks, there's no solvency. We're having a massive solvency crisis. And this is continuing. People are wondering why. Banks aren't lending, small business, and you have the beast called Obamacare, which is absolutely decimating small businesses. It's unreal, folks. You're talking about the perfect storm. You're talking about an orchestrated, designed implosion.
It's so funny because it's probably the biggest headline, and it was ironic because it comes from Harvard, and it was something like, almost 60% of young people, they gave Obamacare a thumbs down, and they're absolutely rejecting it. I mean, what an absolute. I mean, the Democrats are delusional that this is going to be a winner for them. I mean, it's hilarious. The Ponzi scheme's exposed. I mean, the jig is up, and it's amazing because why should the people take the fall for these lying, filthy banksters? How does that work?
Because they're Luciferians at the core, and they have a disdain and hatred of mankind.
I agree with that.
It gets back to the spiritual. It's a spiritual thing.
Yep.
We run into problems when we try to relate spiritual matters in the physical, because you and I would not have a conceptual thing. Why would somebody want to do this to people? There's one thing having a con man down the street and steal a purse from an 85-year-old lady. Okay, but when an entity and a small elite group or group of elites want to destroy, the economy and lives of billions of people, that goes beyond just psychopathy. That goes into, a hatred of mankind to the point of death.
That's right out of the Saul Alinsky playbook.
Yeah, well, it does. But Sheila, it also, of course, and I've written about this, the anti-humanity underlies the whole environmental movement. There are very very well educated people out there saying, in fact, the Club of Rome, that humanity is the problem for the planet, and the overpopulation, reduce the numbers, get rid of the people, and
well,
then
it's
you
a
have better
Luciferian
control.
Eugenics. Yeah, that's what it is, a Luciferian sinister eugenics plan unfolding is what it really is, as Ken alluded to.
Yeah.
Well, there's
exactly.
an interesting thing to look at. Out of all the dictators in that throughout history, which individual, by omission or commission, has caused the death of more people than anybody in history?
Stalin, irrefutably.
Okay, you say Stalin. Supposedly 40 million. Mao, supposedly 60 million, whatever. They're not even close. The one who has actually caused the most deaths because of actions that they specifically did and the movement that they caused was Rachel Carson.
Oh, that's
I would agree with that.
Rachel Carson in Silent Scream and got the DDTs removed. And what the DDTs had done was it eradicated malaria completely from Africa. And ever since the UN, based on her false, pseudoscience, where do we get that with climate change? Based on her pseudoscience, they got rid of DDTs, and 90 million Africans have died of malaria since it was eradicated in the 60s.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I'm sure Bill Gates' vaccination scam will go right along with that nicely.
Exactly, and this is why I'm relating the climate change, the vaccinations, this euthanasia thing. This is all the same. It's just covered up with a new cover on the book. What was once Silent Scream is now Al Gore's whatever crap he did. Forgive my French.
It's climate crisis now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's climate crisis. It's not climate change. Tim and I are deniers, by the way.
Yeah, the guy that's creating this terminology is John Holdren, who of course was the big eugenics guy back in the 70s and wrote with Paul Ehrlich. And he's the one that the other day came out with the polar vortex, which doesn't exist. It's actually the circumpolar vortex, and he presented it as if it's something new. And he actually took time to make a 2-minute video at the White House on it, and all it does is illustrate his ignorance. But he's the one that when they went from global warming to climate change, when people started pointing out that climate change is normal, it changes all the time. Tell us something we don't know. So he created climate disruption. And then when that didn't really catch on, he went to climate catastrophe. So they're the masters at creating these words that have a huge effect upon people. It's the whole public relations. It's really the con job game that's going on. But I agree about Rachel Carson, and I got to admit, I'd never thought about it in those terms, but you're absolutely right.
Well, this is, and see how we can relate this to finance and that, okay, is that behind the scenes they will always put up the boogeymen. Okay, always put up the boogeymen. Stalin, Hitler, they always talk about this, but behind the scenes there are people that are funding him. The Prescott Bushes and the Wall Street bankers who funded Hitler into power. The Wall Street bankers who funded Lenin to do his revolution. Okay, these are the people who have, you wonder about this too. One of the idols of the African American community is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington joined Margaret Sanger and followed her views on eugenics when it came to the creation of Planned Parenthood. This is why Planned Parenthood was first, the first place it was built was in Harlem. And Booker T. Washington was in agreement that they had to get rid of a large majority of the African American population so that they could have a better genetics of it. But he's worshipped as an idol, okay, simply because he's black. Same thing with Obama, simply because he's black. There's no rhyme or reason behind it. Okay, we have this worship of Bill Clinton because he plays saxophone and wears boxer briefs. But when you take a look at what he actually did, he was a moron. He was very Slick Willie for a reason. He's a moron. When you get down to the details, okay, when you ask the tough questions, whether it's politically or economically, when you get down to the one, they can't answer them, and two, you realize that everything that they've been pushing has been an obfuscation, a cover for what's really going behind the scenes. Okay, why is it that the president and his administration have been talking recovery for the last 4 years when, if you get down to the statistics, we've been in a 4% decline for 5 years? Okay, it's using that NLP because if you throw the words out enough, people won't. Even though they're unemployed, they're on welfare, they can't find a job, they've got student loans from the kids, the kids coming out have student loans for $100,000 or more. They've got no future. They can't see anything, but they still believe it.
Yep.
That reminds me of when they started pairing the word volatility with the dollar. I mean, you never heard that either, but NLP-wise, you throw that out enough.
Yep, that's V's favorite statement these days.
Yeah. Incidentally, somebody earlier mentioned Lord Acton's comment about power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The sentence that followed that never gets reported is that he said, and most great men are bad men. And so Paul Johnson, who is one of my heroes, and he's written a book on people that have influenced the world, and one of the founding persons of the whole environmental movement was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and when you read the essay on him by Johnson, and Rousseau had, I believe it was 6 or 7 children, and he put all of them into a home, which of course in those days meant it was a death certificate. They don't believe any of them lived past the age of 6. Yet this is the guy that is the founding, disciple of environmentalism. And it's really quite an astonishing book. The book by Johnson is called The Intellectuals. And, of course, it shows the complete disconnect between the ideas for which they're praised for and what they actually thought and how they lived their lives. And I just finished reading a short biography of Darwin by Johnson, and he points out that Darwin was a huge fan of Malthus. And took Malthus's book with him on the Beagle when he went off to the Galapagos Islands, but where with his own work and his own science he demanded evidence and facts to back up ideas, he never questioned what Malthus was saying, yet all the evidence that Malthus presented for his ideas was simply wrong. And yet that Malthusian idea about overpopulation is the absolute basis of modern-day environmentalism. So very, very little of this bears any investigation. And Sheila, you and I have talked about before, and it's part of that argument that the public are fooled by the comment that no one person can change the world. The reality is one person can change the world, but there's only ever been one person in history that changed the world for good, and that was Jesus Christ. All the rest of them have changed it for evil. And I think that's a very telling part about how the history is distorted, how these people are presented as different and other than what they really are.
Which is evil incarnate.
And this is why it is so, because I'm certainly not perfect or knowledgeable in everything. V's got a lot more inside connections than I do. I try my best to see from the macro, but in the end, I try to always go back to my foundation of, Holy Spirit, is this true? Is this not true? And even more important, okay, if this is true, then what do you want me to do? And then seek on that. Okay, so I usually can cut through the middleman in that aspect. But the point is that we probably have to learn more than anything to not get bogged down with the details of every little news thing or evidence that is coming up. Perhaps we can all agree, what? We're heading headlong into an inevitability. Once you realize that the inevitability is coming, then you can make decisions. If it's 2008 and there's a credit crisis in front of us and they put a Band-Aid fix on there, then we really don't know what the consequences and results are going to be, because we saw the stock market go down to 7,500, 7,400. We saw unemployment start to rise. We saw the rise of a lot of things. The rise of the Fed starting, massive money printing when before they were just manipulating interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we saw this, but in the end, 2000. It's like with America. How many times has the U.S. said we're gonna attack Iran? 2008, we're going to war with Iran. 2009, we're going to war with Iran. 2000, you get my point. They keep saying it over and over. Mm-hmm. We keep hearing about all these problems over and over, but people have quickly gotten tired of, okay, when is it going to occur? When's it going to happen? And in the meantime, a large majority of people who were expecting things are suddenly saying, the boy who cried wolf has cried wolf too much.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we run into problems where, okay, here's a new indicator. Wells Fargo is sending out new letters that's saying that in April they're going to start charging $5 for all deposits on U.S. and international transactions. It's another indicator. Okay, But what that's saying, of course, is that the banks are pretty much insolvent, and they're trying to desperately get as much money as they can. But with so many of these indicators and so many things, the stock market goes to record numbers, and yet we're preaching gold and silver and saying the stock market's going to collapse. In reality, who's going to believe us? The stock market is supposed to have collapsed, before, but it's not doing it. So
Sheila, can I raise a point here? One of the things that dealing with students and teaching seniors classes and learning from them and teaching young people, it suddenly dawned on me that one of the things that happens is what I've called gradualism. And I thought about this when, talking about history. So the student is told in England, for example, that Henry VIII fought with Rome and declared England Protestant, and that's it. And people think, overnight England became Protestant. As you know, there's still Catholic holdouts there, and in fact, some of the Anglicans are converting back to Catholicism, which is an interesting trend. But my point is that history and events are gradual, and you see this in a couple get married and everything's fine, and then one of them is doing something the other doesn't like, and that person then decides, no, I won't say anything about it. I don't want to cause trouble. And then it goes on, and other things happen, and over time you let a whole lot of things go until suddenly a year or two later, there's problems, and somebody comes from outside and says, "What the heck are you people doing? This is insanity." But because it's occurred gradually, but because it's occurred gradually, and you're within it, and you're sort of going along with it, it's become quotes unquote normal. And I think that's one of the things that is the problem. That you say, well, one day there's one event, and then a week later there's another event, but very, very few people ever string those together to see, well, where's this leading us all to? How far have we shifted? And it's one of the things that I see with the young people, and talking to the young people all the time. The attitude has changed, and the attitude now is you only broke the law if you got caught.
Well, isn't that the irony? What he's saying? What he's saying, V, is because if you're an investor and you are dealing with your own money, you pay attention each day to these events, to these changes, to these things. Those who give their money to the broker for the 401k, they don't.
No. And worse than that, with the mutual funds, they don't. It's even more diversified.
Well, it's interesting. I always have to laugh at Bernanke. Remember, guys, money, gold is not money. Isn't that just absolutely hilarious? Do we still have Ken and V on the line?
I'm here. I was pausing to see if V stepped in, but it sounds like he may have dropped off. So okay.
I see him on the line still. But Ken and V, absolutely, you guys are just absolutely such a melding of the minds, and you've given us so much information to chew on. We've got about got about 10 minutes to wrap up the show. Is there anything you think is really significant, fellas? Take it away, and I want to, of course, I want you to give out your information, how people can get a hold of you. I mean, just thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's just absolutely, it's really mind-numbing what's happening. And again, my concern is I don't think people are even going to see this coming. And, again, just weigh in on anything you think is really integral for the listeners to know.
I think I'm back in. I'm sorry about that. I had the mute button on, and I was just talking. But I think it's important.
More people should do that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I think I strongly believe in my heart of hearts that if there's any sort of preparatory work that an individual needs to do, this is the last year to do it. If you've been sitting on the fence about trying to get gold and silver, this is your year to do it. You might not even have the entire year of 2014, but this is your time while supplies are still available. And that supply pool is shrinking by the day. If you need your credit fixed, get out of debt. This is your year to do it. And you can contact me about that. It's, Guerilla Economist at gmail.com. You can go to the website, roguemoney.net. There's a lot of information there. I'm there. Ken's there. Andy's there. John L. is over there. I mean, there's a lot of great information there. But you have to equip yourself. It's great for you to, tune into the radio, listen to a program like this, and be like, hey, that's a wonderful program. Well, it's so informative. But if you sit on your rear end and you do nothing, then you're no better off than someone else who doesn't know anything and lives in such ignorance and believes that ignorance is bliss. So this is it. This is the final year. We've talked about the last program that me and Ken did. We talked about that 2013 was the year of transition, and 2014 is going to be the year of implementation. This is the year that a lot of the things that many people have been warning about, I've been warning about it, Ken's been warning about it. This is the year that a lot of those things come to fruition. A lot of those things come into play. And let me tell you folks something about hyperinflation. When you study over 800 years of human economic activity, and I have over close to 900 years of economic data at my fingertips, one of the things that always stands out to me in every single case is that hyperinflation always catches the population by surprise. And it's only a very small few that are adequately prepared to deal with it. So unless you deal with it now, that as soon as this program ends, you do what you got to do. You make those right calls. If you don't know where to go, you don't know who to ask, again, you can contact me at Guerilla Economist, that's Guerrilla, Economist, one word, at gmail.com. And I'll lead you, and I'll point you exactly where you need to go, where you need to get the things from. And it's that simple, folks. Time is precious. It is the most precious resource you have. Do it for yourself. Do it for your family and for the future of your family. Ken?
Yeah, the most important thing I want to express, okay, is because just like in Daniel, when it talked about seal the books until the time when everything's accelerated, when people can travel to and fro instantly. If you look back at 2007, 2008, this is the thing that sticks out to my mind more than anything. I remember watching CNBC, and they had the CEO of Bear Stearns on, and they were interviewing him, and he said explicitly, "We have $26 billion capitalization. We are fine." That was a Wednesday. By Saturday, Bear Stearns and Lehman was gone. Merrill Lynch would go shortly after. They were gone in less than 4 days. And then we had instantly the creation of TARP and the threatening that some congressman said of the potential for martial law. That's how fast it will go. Okay, the mainstream media, the corporations, the banks, the government, the politicians, they will never let the public know how bad it is, how quickly it's going to happen, and what their decision is going to be made until after they're done. So don't look for a specific event to occur, okay? One, discern it in your spirit if you think things are going to a certain point, and then seek, the Holy Spirit for guidance. That's number one. If you're not Christian and you don't have that discernment, then look at all the indicators outside of the mainstream media, what we're talking about. Look at what Europe's doing. Look at what Europe's already done. Look at what the U.S. has created, okay, with Dodd-Frank, with Obamacare, with the fact that they are not creating jobs, with the fact that they have stopped unemployment. They're going to probably stop a lot of food stamp stuff coming through. They can't afford to do this anymore. Look at all these indicators and then come to your own decision. I'm not going to take responsibility for choices people make, but I do feel a responsibility for laying out here. Take a look at these, make your own mind, and then make your best decision, because if something does occur, it's going to come swift, it's going to come overnight, and by then it's going to be too late.
Well, and don't you think, really, Ken and V, we could be looking at $50,000 an ounce for gold pretty soon, and I've also got a really good friend at Gold Corp that thinks we've maybe got about 5 to 6 years of silver left. That's quite frightening.
Yeah, you look at just gold itself. A lot of geologists are saying that we're at peak gold. There hasn't been a new mine discovered in the last 11 or 12 years. Same thing holds for silver. They're, barring any unforeseen new discovery, everybody, you got over 3,000 some odd mining companies out there, then they haven't found a single new vein of silver anywhere. So, this is, again, the whole supply. They do platinum. Platinum, I am a huge bull on platinum. And platinum has a tremendous upside for a lot of reasons, and it's being monetized as well. And same thing, there's nothing new out there. If anything, supplies are dwindling.
Well, I think silver and platinum are kind of a nice multifaceted metal, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the thing with silver is, silver is cheap enough now that people can still get into it. It's like the Bitcoin craze. Bitcoin is an interesting thing. I know we didn't talk too much about it. It's getting more and more accepted, but Bitcoin more than anything is like that barometer. People are still trying to figure out, the system is corrupt, the system is broken, is there something we can do? And I know some friends who, in the Patriot movement, who I talked to, they jumped on Bitcoin back in 2008, and then they forgot about it and suddenly realized they had, I got 1,000 Bitcoins. They became an instant millionaire. Now, what they do with it, I think a lot of them are not changing it back to fiat, or if they do, they're just paying off their bills and holding it. But the point being is that even if Bitcoin doesn't go anywhere, or if it peters out after about 3 or 4 years, the real thing is that people there's something inherently, a frequency or a mass consciousness or whatever they want to call it, people are rejecting the current system. That means that they're going to be ready and willing to accept a new system that promises them hope. That, to me, more than anything, scares me, because we know prophetically what the next offering is going to be, and it's not going to be by the Almighty, it's going to be by the adversary. So
well, it's that's an interesting word you used earlier, is acceleration. If we've never seen more of an acceleration of everything ramping up to this, globally orchestrated onset of what's coming down the pike.
Technology, weather, earth changes, just everything is accelerating. And this is why people are so overwhelmed too. This is why people are so overwhelmed. Can you imagine at the start of the 20th century, you were an immigrant coming over from Italy or Greece. You didn't have anything. You grew up modestly poor. You come to the new island. You go through Ellis Island, and you said, it's a new world. You're scared, but you're excited at the same time. You've heard the thing of opportunities. Well, for the very most part, the irony is we think India, and especially Calcutta, is overcrowded. The worst Calcutta ever was like 456 people per square mile. In New York City, during that time of immigration, New York City had a population density of 750 people per square mile, almost double what India is.
Yes.
Can I just jump in here for a second? I agree with you that there are some very real things coming down the line. But for me, one of the biggest concerns is that they have created so many completely false scares. And to sort out, or whether you even need to sort out what's real and what isn't real, whether you just say, look, I can't sort it out, and that's what people are saying to me. I don't know what to believe anymore, and so I'm saying, well, you just don't believe anything except that something's going to happen, and you better be prepared for it. And there's only one way to be prepared. But it's this creation of false problems that I think is accelerating things rather than an actual acceleration. But I may be wrong on that too.
No, what is the enemy? The enemy is out to lie, steal, and deceive. Deception is one of the most powerful things in the world. That's how Hitler got into power. He deceived the people into making them think that he had all the answers. This is what we're seeing. Didn't Obama say he was going to stop the oceans or fix the oceans and do all this? This is what a demagogue does, and these are the deceptions that come through. People believed him when he said he was improving the economy. People believed him when he keeps saying that I didn't know anything about all these scandals going through. People are believing him. Okay, this is what we find is eventually you get desensitized to the point that you'll accept a lie, or your apathy is so great that you just ignore the lie and hope that you can make it through another day.
With Obama, somebody was that old thing about anybody can be president of the U.S. and Obama proves it.
Well, V and Ken, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I really agree with the last statement. It's time for the nation to get back on its knees. That really is the answer. And V and Ken, again, your time is so valuable, and I appreciate everything you've said.
Yeah.
I'd really love my listening audience to go to roguemoney.net and Ken, you write a blog as well, do you not?
Yeah, it's thedailyEconomist.com, all one word, and on the lower right side pretty much has all my Examiner finance articles.
Excellent. Well, I know you wrote a scathing article about China back in September about their own currency buying oil, and you've written some just unbelievably fantastic articles, and both of you are such a melding of the financial minds, and again, I really appreciate your time. And I know we had a wall of calls, and we didn't get to take all the calls, and we didn't get to take really any. But, again, I'd love you to check out V's website. Go to thedailyEconomist.com. And, again, join us Thursday from 3 o'clock to 6 p.m., and that's 6 p.m. Eastern Time, every Thursday, the Weekend Vigilante. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great evening.
Have a great night.
This is a globally orchestrated meltdown to reshape the world into complete totalitarian global governance. Really, the end game here is eco-sinister Luciferian eugenics plan. Ask yourself, how is it that out-of-control megalomaniac rogues run things? Tyranny, fear-mongering, drones, geopolitical chaos, financial crises, mass censorship.
If you're planning, you've got to plan in a way to defeat the existing system.
Mindless minions, they're walking around in sort of a zombie-like trance.
The Weekend Vigilante Show with Sheila Zelinsky. Thursday night, 3 p.m. Pacific Time, 6